is looking at you, kid.
I'm Charles Foster Kane!
Hey, Stella!
Suck on this.
What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. Today, I'm joined by my pal, Bill Scurry, and the topic at hand is Victor Von Doom, ruler of Latveria, the biggest icon of the classic Marvel villains, and scheduled to appear in some potentially massive Avengers movies, aka Doomsday in 2026 and Secret Wars in 2027. For my part, between the recent news about the Russos and RDJ returning to the MCU, as well as the success of Deadpool and Wolverine, I'm suddenly feeling something that I have not felt in about 5 years, actual excitement for upcoming Marvel movies. Now, we don't have any access to any information on whether RDJ is playing like the Victor Von Doom or some sort of variant because of the goddamn multiverse, but what we can discuss is all the cool shit that went down with Doom back in the classic Doomsday storylines and Secret War storylines of the past, and fingers crossed, hopefully the best of these comics will inspire some of the scenes and some of the movies, much like how Mark Millar's Civil War comics inspired the third Captain America flick. But we'll get to all those details over the next hour or two. For now, Mr. Scurry, how the hell are you? And what have you been up to as of late?
I am fine. I am in Amsterdam. I've spent some time this summer in New York because we bumped into each other back in June at the film premiere. Hanging out with our good friends Rob Cotto and
I missed the premiere. I saw you at Morandi, I guess a day or so later, but due to my college reunion, I missed the premiere of Stevie Van Zandt.
Well, you saw it 2 days later, which was nice. You did very good. I did a whole shakedown episode of the two of those guys. If audience has not seen that episode, it's a really good approximation of everything that they put like 5 years of work into it. I was a part of the team, very small part of it, but I was just glad to see Billy and Rob getting all that approbation. Bill's been on a victory lap, going back and forth. He was
a world tour.
A world tour, and he deserves it. I mean, I hope he's still living on the fumes because he's put so much work into it. But
and if people are wondering where to find the video, if you're on the channel, there's like the video column and there's the live column. We recorded it live, and so it's I'm doing everything now just in one column just to make it easier to find. But if you go to the live column, you'll see the most recent live video was my interview with Rob Cotto and Bill Scurry, not Bill Scurry, Bill Deck about Disciple, the Stevie Van Zandt doc.
And because it's in that stupid YouTube column, that's why no one ever sees it. Because of the way YouTube batches videos and this really fucking
Well, I think if I did like a live video a week, people would get used to content in the two different columns. But since everything's in that one column, that's just how I'm going to, and this will also be in the main column. That's my strategy moving forward. And because I was always wondering, like, how do I combine Wrong Reel and my YouTube channel into one entity? And I finally realized, all right, when I'm talking to you or I'm talking to Becky or I'm talking to Bill or I'm talking to whomever, I just slap the Wrong Reel logo on at the beginning, but I don't have to like keep track of the numbers or anything like Wrong Reel. It's much like Chinatown, which I know you're a fan of. Wrong Reel is a state of mind, and we know when it's Wrong Reel. And this is an episode of Wrong Reel.
Bad fuck glass, exactly.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the topic at hand, because I guess when you and I got together and did those videos, like our 1970s, like cigar smoking, scotch drinking conversations, at that time, you and I were talking about we were predicting that there was trouble afoot, that Marvel was on the decline. And as it turned out, we were right. Like some of the movies started to severely underperform, the fan base started to dissolve and scatter. We saw a lot of shows that kind of came and went, leaving a very little impact, shows like Echo. But it seems like this summer, somebody at Disney was like, we've got to make one last big, expensive push to turn the ship around. And between Deadpool and Wolverine, which is now the highest grossing R-rated film ever, and then the announcement that the Russos and the RDJ were returning to the MCU for like a week or two there, so I was like, am I getting excited about fucking Marvel comics and Marvel movies again? Like it was an old familiar feeling, and I don't want to get ahead of myself because we have a lot of shows and movies between now and Doomsday, which might diminish some of our enthusiasm. But I guess as a fellow nerd who's read a lot of comics over the years, between Agatha, Ironheart, Cap 4, Thunderbolts, and Fantastic Four, which of those do you think will diminish the enthusiasm, and which of those do you think will fan the flames of the enthusiasm the most between now and Doomsday?
I have a feeling Agatha is going to appeal to a very narrow audience. It's an underserved Marvel audience because that one looks like it's heavily femme and queer, I think, and it certainly is not aimed at us. That doesn't mean we might not watch it and might enjoy it, but I mean, I'm not asking for it.
I
But
saw the
think
trailers. I was like, you know what? We're done here. Thanks, but no
I
thanks.
might know people who are into it. I see there's enthusiasm on Twitter or whatever you want to call it. You know, any of the social medias that you're on. But I don't know if it's going to really burnish the brand. I mean, again, WandaVision, as much as I think that was the one kind of solid, successful stream win that they had at the beginning of the pandemic, that's now when it's dust in the wind. It's like God knows where Wanda is in the continuity. I don't really know what kind of heat that show has, other than critics who remember really well. So this is they're drafting off of a show that was what two and a half years ago, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things where that song in that one episode of WandaVision it was Agatha all along. For like a day or so, that song got so popular. Some developing exec was like, we need to capitalize on this success and greenlight a show right now. Yeah. But here we are, it's like 2024, and people are like, since when is Agatha enough of a character in Marvel Comics to justify a show? Like when you and I as kids remember her as like the little old lady looking after Wanda's kids and that sort of thing, but not exactly Doctor Doom, not exactly fucking Thor. It's Agatha. So let's keep our expectations modest.
It's too bad because you know what? Lizzie Olsen and Bettany were great in the show. Like all the actors were great. I thought, and that's Shackman is the one who's directing Fantastic Four. So all right, so the obverse of the question you asked me, what is going to fan the flames, is Fantastic Four looks like it's going to be a winner. I mean, that's being wildly optimistic. However, the fucking DNA on that thing looks really good. I mean, right off the bat, it looked like the bit of footage that they leaked out from Comic-Con is going to be nuts. Like when you actually get to see this stuff, and the actors seem to be really
all I needed to see was Vanessa Kirby and Hall H looking like a goddamn goddess. I was like, ooh, Invisible Woman, because I've always had a mommy fetish for Invisible Woman ever since I was a little kid. Like I think she was everybody's mommy fetish in the 1980s, as drawn by John Byrne. Vanessa Kirby is very solid casting.
Pedro Pascal is great casting. I really like Eben Moss-Backrack from The Bear. I've seen him in a billion things. He's been like a really good New York actor for a good long time. He's playing Ben Grimm. It's like the casting is and Ralph.
I tried watching The Bear. Every time he spoke, I wanted to hit him in the face, so I had to stop watching The Bear. But anyway, I might be in the minority on that front. I find him intensely annoying. When I think of Ben Grimm, I think of like a big, burly dude from like the Lower East Side. I don't think of like this weird kind of awkward looking skinny dude, but I hope I'm wrong. But I agree. Fantastic Four, the fact that they're doing 60s, that's got me interested. I'm very annoyed by the female Silver Surfer. For me, there's Norrin Radd and there's no other Silver Surfer, and he's one of the most iconic. Sure. I mean, he's one of the iconic 60s era Marvel characters. So there are plenty of warning signs, but I think it'll be better than Thunderbolts. I think it'll be better than Cap 4. Cap 4 will probably be solid, but I'm not expecting Civil War.
Cap 4, I think right now everybody is like picking at the meat of Cap 4 just based on the trailer and a half that you got. And it's like so far the trailer doesn't look any kind of bad, and the costume is better than the one they put in the TV show. And Harrison Ford being in it, not necessarily an imprimatur of quality, but the Red Hulk thing could be good because that too. The original, was it Jeff Loeb?
Yeah, and Ed McGuinness.
Yeah, and Ed McGuinness. It was great. And it's like I don't think it's exactly that, but I think it's adjacent to that. It's like you say with Mark Miller. What you do is you base this stuff on the loose concepts, and then you have to throw away the comic bookness of it, and just like serve it as a film. And ultimately, that's going to be the best treatment all along. Is if you just use the spine of this stuff. Strip it for parts, but they're really good parts. I mean, these are really good jackets and coats of paint and wallpaper.
But my morbid curiosity makes me wonder what was the first version of that movie, because they basically reshot and recut the whole goddamn thing this year. They basically shot Cap 4 twice.
Yeah,
and I would love to know the true behind the scenes of what was the original direction and what's the new direction and who made that call, because apparently the director's been more or less kind of sidelined. So I think it's been more or less kind of producer driven since then. But I think everybody over at Disney is just like ignore everything you see before your eyes. Starting in 2026, we're going to be back on track.
Well, the thing is, it brings up two movies, right? It either brings up Rogue One, which I think everything that people liked about Rogue One was owed to Tony Gilroy, or it brings up Justice League with the whole Zack Snyder being sidelined and bringing in Joss Whedon. It's like, and maybe everything you hate about that was owing to the reshoots that were all studio mandated at the end of it. So I don't know. I mean, obviously it's not ideal, and doing a little bit of reshoots and sort of fine tuning stuff, and that could have its place with this gigantic studio-driven blockbuster cut.
Oh, that's totally normal. But like with Cap 4, they reshot the whole fucking movie.
It's excessive. What was is the budget something like 325? Some like ludicrous 250? It's like some.
It depends on whose reports you believe. But I've heard anywhere from 3 to 4. And I'm like, that's a lot of money to spend on a Captain America movie.
You know what? Kevin Costner could have shot 8 Horizons for that kind of money. That's how fucked up it is. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a big expensive movie, because then you think, well, then they got to spend a little bit of money marketing it. So it's like, is this movie gonna have to make like 1.5 billion to be profitable? I mean, it's just insane.
I mean, that's going to be bad money after good money. I'm sure the movie will be okay. I don't think it's going to knock our socks off. I mean,
I'll be there day one. I like Anthony Mackie quite a bit, but the filmmakers, let's just say, I mean, the previous, I guess the second and the third Captain America movie had the dream team of the Russos and the basically from Winter Soldier to Civil War to Infinity War to Endgame. You had the dream team in terms of the writers and the directors, and that was the spine of the Marvel Universe and the momentum of the Marvel Universe for years. And so that's why I've got some excitement for Doomsday and Secret Wars, because they're reassembling as much of the dream team as they can to try to recapture that magic. But they won't be benefiting from like 10 years of storylines building up to that. But I hope that with the Fantastic Four movie, that at the very end of it, there'll be some sort of Doctor Doom intro, because for me, Doctor Doom, as great a character as he is, he's nothing without his rivalry with Reed Richards. Like, those two characters, they are the yin and yang of the Marvel Universe, and they have been since the early 60s. And I think you can't get Doom right unless you get Reed right. You can't get Reed right unless you get Doom right. It's like doing Venom movies without Spider-Man. It's like, what the fuck are you doing? Venom means nothing without Spider-Man. Kraven the Hunter means nothing without Spider-Man. And the same holds true with Doom. Doom and Reed will always be at loggerheads until the end of time.
Yeah, they're only as good as the other, and that's ultimately what the 2015 Secret War, it's like, that's the spine of it. That's such a crucial part of it. The sort of almost like it's describing the soul of the Marvel Universe is down to these two men. Like Hickman does such a great job at making that the summation of Secret Wars 2015.
And it's so sad. I mean, I recently picked up a physical media copy of Hickman's Secret Wars, and as I was rereading it, because I had almost no memory of reading it from like 9 years ago, but when you get to the end, and Doom basically admits that he's always been a little jealous of Reed with his family and being a little smarter. He's like, "You're right. Curse you." I just started howling with laughter, because Hickman's one of those writers who really seems to understand Doom. He understands Doom as he's being portrayed in 2015, but also understands the history of how he's been portrayed through the 60s, through the 80s, like all the great Doom story arcs. Hickman, he just knows his stuff, but he really just in his bones seems to understand who Victor Von Doom is.
Yeah, both of the writers between Shooter on the 1984 Secret Wars and Hickman, like those two guys understood the voice of, I mean, first and foremost, they got the voice of Doom correct. And whereas I think in Hickman's case, some of his other characters can sound the same. They have a kind of, I don't know, it's not monotonous, but they have very much the same voice, the same way Brian Michael Bendis characters do. And the same thing with Shooter, where some of the characters could sound like they were just spat out of the Roy Thomas factory. The thing about getting Doom right in each case is what makes these fucking things absolutely sore.
Yeah. Jim Shooter actually came to my high school my senior year to talk about visual storytelling. And I think I was the only person in the crowd who was like, this is going to be really fucking cool. And he basically just sang the praises of Jack Kirby for like an hour straight. He just walked us through panel by panel the way Kirby would tell us stories with incredible dynamism and excitement. And there's one guy behind me who ended up being my college roommate. He kept going like, Hancock, I bet you like this. Hancock, I bet you really like this. And finally I was like, shut the fuck up, you fucking piece of shit. Like, I'm trying to drink from Jim Shooter's mind. I mean, but Jim Shooter, for people who don't know, he started writing comics when I think he was 13. He was on the Legion of Superheroes. And in his job interview for DC Comics, famously, he brought his mom for the interview. And the artist that he was working with, he said, really respected him, because when Jim Shooter would write his comics, he wouldn't write them like a script. He would draw little stick figures with word balloons and the captions. So he'd write them like a comic as opposed to a traditional like teleplay or screenplay. But because he was willing to do a little bit of drawing, the artist had some respect for him. And apparently the artist kept a revolver like in like a shoulder holster, like as he was drawing. He's a really intense guy. But anyway, Shooter was off to the races at a very young age. And in the early 80s at Marvel, when he was the editor-in-chief, he had this famously combative style where he liked pitting writers against each other and artists against each other. He liked that competitive environment, very, very like typical New Yorker in a lot of ways. But there's no denying that at that time you had Claremont and Byrne and all these legends doing some of the best work, or Frank Miller doing some of the best work of their careers. You and I, as little 8-year-old children during his heyday, it was a very good time to be alive if you were interested in people in tights punching each other.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was doing research for this, I wanted to make sure that I love getting a chance to dip back into Shooter to see he is such a titanic figure. Where, I mean, to us, I think that I started reading comics at the end of the 80s. And by that point, Shooter was mostly gone, but his effect was still there. Like, he reinvented Marvel. If it needs to be said for anybody listening within the sound of our voice and the image, our images on screen chattering, he was the 9th EIC of Marvel. I think he took over for Roy Thomas in 1978. Or no, Archie, maybe it was Goodwin. I think he took over for Archie Goodwin in 78. And he had this 9-year run at Marvel Comics where, yeah, like you said, to say that he was combative with his artists and writers is one thing, but I mean, he set himself up almost as the bad guy. He was like the Wicker Man in the office, where everybody was almost like built to hate him. And there are so many, the book, the Marvel book, I can't remember who the fuck wrote that Marvel book that came out about 6 or 7 years ago, but it's like, that was the bulk of it. Granted, they talked about Stan and Jack, they talked about Archie Goodwin, they talked about Neil Adams. But when it got to the 80s, everybody was ready to talk about Jim. No one holds anything back. There's no NDAs. There's none of this. There's none of this shit about like, you know what? I may be jeopardizing a job in the future if I say something about Jim Lee or Claremont or Bob Harris. It's like, no, Jim Shooter. Everybody uncorked.
Yeah.
Everybody uncorked everything they ever had to say about him, and it's amazing in that everyone is so loosed in terms of talking about how dyspeptic they were, how all the various accounting for all the bullshit, the petty scorekeeping, all these people like Christopher Priest, Peter David, Tom DeFalco, all these names from the past, everybody itemized all the shit they stacked up for a decade. And they were just holding on to it and reserving it and harboring it. And that's why it's like, Shooter had a like when he was out in the woods for a while in the 1990s, but then he came back during the speculator boom. He started a company called Valiant. He was the EIC of the company called Valiant.
Which for a while was like, if you were a comic book purist, I remember I'd go into a comic shop. I remember going to a comic shop maybe like 94, 95 and saying I was like a Marvel guy. And the guy behind the counter was like, oh, you're pathetic. It's Valiant all the way. Like Valiant was the holy grail for comic book purists for a certain period of time. It had a run where like, Image and Marvel and DC were kind of struggling in the 90s. And suddenly Valiant was there. It's like when people say like a comedian's like a comedian's comedian. Valiant was like the comic book lovers comic book. And so, yeah, but it definitely played a role for the hardcore comic people who did not like what the big two were up to.
It gave, the thing is because Marvel was hiring Image ripoff guys who could swipe the pencil styles, guys like, what is it, Mark Pacella and early Greg Capullo. And I mean, these guys are good artists and they were asked to imitate the Image style. So they all came in swiping Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, the big Image guys up top. And so Marvel had second run guys. Image had shitty comics with good artists who were all running behind. They're being penciled in by sidekicks and studio guys. And then so Jim Shooter rolls in with Valiant, which was all the old school guys from the Bronze Age. It was guys like Don Heck, not Gene Colan. He wasn't there, I don't think. But there were some of these guys who were just jobbers that he worked with. Guys like Richie Buckler, people who could meet a deadline. And I think Shooter's comics are known for being really not flashy. Meat and potatoes core superhero topic. Nothing youth really related or anything like that. But just the idea that this was like, it was ninjas, it was soldiers, it was Superman, it was robots. It was the very basic core concept. And I mean, I think back on it now and I think this stuff was all DOA. I mean, I think it got traction because there was a speculator boom and his stuff was like short shelved. There just wasn't enough of it. But it's like even Shooter, I think he lasted 3 years there too, and he pissed off everybody. He got fired from fucking Valiant because he just burned his bridges. I just buzzsawed through all the editorial there as well.
Yeah, but when it comes to his original Secret Wars from 84 to 85, and I went dumpster diving last night through my long boxes when I was baked out of my mind, and I was able to find 8 of my original comics from the original run back in the day, you know, I'll see if I can like put it side by side with or with your logo, but yeah. But for a period of time when I was 8 years old, and I've mentioned this before, like when I would get into the carpool in the fall of '84 going to school, my friends and I would be going through the latest issue of Secret Wars. Like, oh my God, did you see when Spider-Man beat the fuck out of the X-Men in #3? Or, oh my God, did you see when Spider-Man did blah, blah, blah? Or like reacting like Crusher Creel, like his love affair with Titania, or whatever you want to call her. We were hanging upon every word because suddenly the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, the X-Men, and a few solo guys like Hulk and Spider-Man were all in the same book at the same time. And they were like, you know, like they're always hurt or scattered or injured or dead. Like they're always just getting their asses kicked. It was full-blown war. And at the core of it was Dr. Doom. And I was already a Dr. Doom fan due to John Byrne. John Byrne in the early 80s was really firing on all cylinders, but he had a story arc in this bad boy. And actually, this cover was called Doomsday, which was Fantastic Four 259. Actually, hang on one sec. Is that right? Hang on, let me just check real quick. So 259 and 260, where he technically died. Yeah. So in 259 and 260, Dr. Doom had apparently died while he had been basically trying to use Terrax to take out the Fantastic Four, and he'd imbued him with all the additional kind of cosmic might. And it was a great little battle. But at the end of it, it appeared as if Dr. Doom had died, but then he came back in Secret Wars, and I was just at the perfect age where like the way he spoke and the way he was able to corral all the villains and the way he was able to take charge and the way he was able to take on the Beyonder, I just completely, totally fell under its spell. And it took a couple of years before he could kind of like recover, because as you can see in my name for my persona here, Christophe Renard, there was a couple year period where due to his death, his memories had been implanted in this boy, his heir. But then when Doom came back, he was always trying to regain his heritage and regain his kingdom. And it was just a great time to be a Doom fan. And I just hope that with these upcoming movies that they can find a way to capture like what made Doom so iconic, so cool, so interesting. Like the fact that he's really good at sorcery, really good at science, speaks in third person. Like he's a figure of ridicule in so many ways, but he's also like this diabolical mastermind who every once in a while will achieve omniscience and omnipotence. And it just makes him so irresistible and so cool. And I think of all the Marvel villains who have ever lived, like he and Magneto are my two favorite, but Dr. Doom's just so goddamn cool. And we've seen so many terrible on-screen presentations so far. I hope that these movies can erase the memory of the Fantastic Four movies that we've seen and try to actually finally get them right. But it might be wishful thinking on my part. But for the next like year or so, I will allow myself to be excited about what might come with Dr. Doom.
I hate to be a jerk off about this, but it's got to be the mask. I mean, the whole thing about Dr. Doom is that I think that in Secret Wars '84 and Secret Wars 2015, you have instances where you see Doom's face. And granted, some flashbacks that Jack and Stan did back in the day too, where they sort of hinted at why he wears the mask. The damage that he, in the experimentation.
Yeah. Reed Richards tells him famously, like, your calculations might be wrong. He's like, who are you to tell me my calculations are wrong? He does the experiment in a way, it blows up in his face, and he blames Reed Richards for ruining his experiment, which is a core part of his character, that arrogance and that I don't know, just like that insecurity combined with the brilliance. It all goes hand in glove.
Yeah, I mean, but like, it's not just a matter of characters. Look, after a while, they took away like Captain America's headpiece, right? Chris Evans was running around the last 2 or 3 movies just essentially with a bear scalp, and for the last fight, he puts it back on. But and Iron Man was constantly flipping his face shield back. The nano probes or whatever the fuck they were would sort of sink back into the neck piece. And yeah, I get it. It's like you pay for these actors, you want to see Downey, you want to see Chris Evans's face. And it's like, I really like the fact that for the longest time, they were sticking with the fact that they wore these masks that look pretty movie accurate. I mean, in Iron Man 1, that fucking build out was really almost like based on Brian Hitch's Ultimate Iron Man suit. It was like really cool and
or even closer, the Warren Ellis Extremis art. Yeah. Who was the artist on that?
It was like
Adi Gradov or whatever his name is.
Adi Gradov, yeah.
He had that really cool style at that time, like in the early aughts, where they rebooted Iron Man and had this incredible storyline with the Extremis storyline, where Warren Ellis was really firing on all cylinders. But it was like they took those comics and like, this looks great. We've got our concept art for our movie. And as we saw with Deadpool and Wolverine, people like the goddamn costumes. My favorite moment of the movie, and I saw it twice in the theater. Hugh Jackman pulls the mask over. I was like, Jesus Christ! Like it looks so good. It's like, how have y'all not figured this out in the last 25 years? That he looks incredible with the comic books accurate Wolverine costume. And yeah, I hope they will lean all the way in on the Doctor Doom costume.
I mean, they have to. The thing is, it's iconic. The face of Doctor Doom. I mean, it is pure Stan and Jack. It's like everything you're talking about, the way Doom speaks, the fact that his villainy in Marvel Comics, him and Magneto were the gigantic heavenly bound threats that they created guys like the Vulture and Green Goblin to counteract as like low-level guys that Spider-Man can fight in New York City, people who aren't going to destroy the Earth, they're just going to throw some bombs around the city. And it's like, they're huge villains for a reason. They're absolutely catastrophic and titanic. And we've had a couple of good Magnetos on film so far. Totally. It's been a very mixed, it's been mixed at least. In
2000, when Ian McKellen played him, even if the movie doesn't hold up as well as perhaps we would like, no one can deny that Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart weren't like a perfect match for that first movie.
They brought all that RSC, they brought all that RADA there. They knew exactly how to do it. And so it's like, if the mask could help Downey, if wearing the mask could help Downey sell the performance. Again, we don't know who Downey is playing. All
right, so give me your theory, or what would you like? Because at this point, everybody keeps saying, it's funny seeing how everybody's so convinced that like he's going to be a certain version of Tony Stark from the multiverse. And at this point, if they never do a multiverse storyline ever again, it'll be soon enough. If they get rid of the Time Variance Authority, like it can't happen soon enough. But I guess maybe the Secret Wars movie might be a way of kind of finally putting the multiverse to bed for all time and putting everything back into the same universe. But from Bill Scurry's point of view, do you want it just to be Robert Downey Jr. playing a completely different person, or would you prefer it to be some sort of Tony Stark variant that kind of confuses all the people that recognize him?
No, I look, if you watched Oppenheimer and you saw him play Louis Strauss, right? The fact is, this fucking guy is an actor and he knows how to sound like characters. He builds a performance. I think Downey is a excellent out-of-box choice to play Doctor Doom. The only problem is we saw him in 10 years worth of movies as Iron Man, a very flamboyant and idiosyncratic character, which again, we track as being close to Downey's actual spirit. But again, Downey's an actor and he's got what, 45 years worth of a track record of
We've seen him play Chaplin. We've seen him in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. We've seen him in Weird Science. We've seen him in a million different things. For my money, if they were taking requests, I would say never even mention the fact that he resembles or kind of looks like Tony Stark. Scar up his face, because Doctor Doom's supposed to have a scarred up face. Put the mask on and let them invent a character from scratch and just enjoy the fact that you've got RDJ back. But I know for some people that would just break their brains.
Absolutely. That would be so fucking audacious. And it's like, you know what? You want to talk about big dick energy? If Feige had it, if he was really spinning around, it's like, this would be the exact way to kind of like grab everybody by the lapels and like smack their face back and forth and say, get with it, we're doing this. And it's like, yeah, we fucking cast him twice in the same storyline. Like, deal with it. He's gonna make it work because he's a fucking
also, by
actor.
the time it comes out, Doomsday, it will have been 7 years since Endgame. Like, there'll be a new generation of, hopefully, a new generation of moviegoers to be like, Endgame? What the fuck's Endgame? Like, I want to see Doomsday. And they're like, that's my Doctor Doom. Like, we don't care about Iron Man, blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, I don't know. But it's so funny, like, seeing how like some commentators and some fans just cannot handle the idea of Robert Downey Jr. playing a different character. They're so married to him as Tony Stark. I'm totally open to him being a brand new character, but let's slow down and wind the clock back to the 1960s, because you were very generous to prepare a bunch of clips and a bunch of like animatics for from comic strips and that sort of thing, kind of tracing the history of Doctor Doom and some different interpretations, many of which did not work, some of which have worked out great. But I actually have never really done the deep dive on the Fantastic Four from the late 60s. I've seen little clips here and there, like when you and I did an X-Men live stream, like when they fought Magneto. Some of those Magneto clips were absolutely hilarious back then. And he also spoke in third person like Doctor Doom. They're basically doing Magneto like Doctor Doom, but what can you tell us about this clip from 1967, which you sent me in advance?
Well, it's definitely bizarre. The animation style was weird. It was very stiff. Like they were almost like animated comic book panels. It was like they just almost took them like South Park and used them and shook the pages. And I mean, that was the very first conception of Fantastic Four. But I think that this is from the era of cartoons where, you know, either the people making the cartoons really hated children or they just really did not think much of the source material because they played very liberally with it. Even the Spider-Man cartoon, these things were enormous back in the day because they were so colorful. I mean, the comic books were huge.
But Ralph Bakshi was working on the Spider-Man show in the late 60s, so at least they had like one good animator on the staff.
I'm sure that there was, you know, like Tim Burton came out of Disney animated movies in the 80s, early 80s and late 70s. It's like these guys are filled with fucking professionals. And it's like, that wasn't their call. It wasn't Ralph. Look, you're going to watch this. You're not going to mistake this with Coonskin at all. I mean, how long is the clip? Is only like 15 seconds or so.
All right, well, let's tee it up right now. Hang on one sec. Booyakasha.
A little to the right, Mrs. Richards. There. That's perfect.
Like this?
Just fine. Now hold it right there.
What's this? Who are you?
Greetings, Mrs. Richards.
I mean, it's not the voice I hear in my mind when I hear Doom's voice. But like, I guess because we're so used to reading we were so used to reading comics for years on end. Everybody had like certain voices that would hear in their mind when like certain characters spoke. But that is one way to portray Dr. Doom. But it does get at the root of the fact that throughout the 1960s, he was the arch nemesis of the Fantastic Four. And I think right around this exact same time is one of the most famous story arcs that the name of the film Doomsday comes from the 1967 storyline, those 4 issues, Fantastic Four, 57, 58, 59, and 60, which I have here in this Marvel Masterworks collection. I used to eat these things up because they're in color. They were gorgeous. Like if you were a fan of comics in the 80s and 90s, one of the ways to read the great arcs from the 60s and 70s was to collect these hardback volumes. And in the story arc, basically he steals the power of Silver Surfer, goes on a murderous rampage, beats the fuck out of the Fantastic Four, and eventually they rob him of his powers. But it's like starting with that Doomsday arc where he stole all of Silver Surfer's powers, every once in a while he would find a way to steal some sort of cosmic entity's, you know, cosmic might and go on a rampage. And it was always just absolutely delightful. But I feel like right around 67 is when Lee and Kirby's approach to FF was really reaching its zenith, where they just could do no wrong. And they were just between the Inhumans and Galactus and Silver Surfer and Dr. Doom. It was just an event every single time they got together to tell stories. So if I'm going to recommend that people read a classic storyline that might inform the upcoming Doomsday film, I think the best place to start is with that 4-issue arc from 1967, where he even has that great classic panel drawn by Jack Kirby, where it's just his eyes. You can see the melted flesh, and it's just saying Doomsday across the top. But if like that is where this Doomsday concept really starts to take root. So 1967, maybe the animation wasn't that strong, but Jack Kirby was really finding his stride.
I was going to say, just to be completely fair here, I think that when we talk about these things from those days, you know, Stan was happy to take the credit. Jack did not necessarily die penniless, but Jack died in a very modest situation. And Jack had as much, if anything, if not more, to do with these characters. The special things that you're talking about, the themes, the ideas, the heightened, Shakespearean Sturm und Drang of it all. Like Jack did that. Stan scripted, generally based what Jack, Jack wasn't a scripter, Jack wasn't a writer, but Jack laid the pages out. He came up with the stories. Stan was like scripting, 1 billion pages a week, and it's like he was struggling to keep up with Jack. But I think Jack was the engine for those things. I mean, all you need to do is go and look at his Fourth World stuff that he did.
Yeah, only a few years later, which I think is his peak.
I don't know. I think I enjoy this Marvel stuff more than the Fourth World stuff. I just think it's a matter, not that it's not good. It just always left me cold because I didn't have a connection with DC the way I did with Marvel.
Gotcha.
But I mean, that it's pure. If anything, you can see what was inside this man's mind, and it's like, again, Stan Lee then moved out to Los Angeles in 1978 to become essentially like the mouthpiece of comics. He had such a pop culture figure because he ran through the 60s and was the voice of Stan's soapbox and kind of created that. What did he used to call it? Pandemonious puffery, the voice, that hype, that bullpen hype voice. He like standardized that.
Yeah, and especially in the early 80s with the cartoons where he would introduce like, hey there, true believers, this is Stan Lee. So like at age 5, I was like, who the fuck's Stan Lee? But he keeps talking over the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends and the Incredible Hulk cartoon that were so big then. I was aware of who Stan Lee was. And then like you would see the same thing happen with the Marvel movies. Like we'd see him like scratching records in the Deadpool movie, and people like an entire new generation of people just started to recognize him without any knowledge of the comics that he wrote back in the 1960s. But he basically was like the mascot for Marvel from the late 70s up to his dying day. He had like a 40-year period where he was just the biggest champion of the brand that ever lived.
And he was like, he was like a Hugh Hefner figure. He didn't exactly wear like a velvet smoking jacket, but he
posed naked. Yeah. He did.
Yeah.
Hugh Hefner didn't pose naked. Stan Lee did.
Stan Lee did. It's true. There's a nude picture out there of Stan Lee. Yeah, and like
with the glasses, he's like the Burt Reynolds pose, like lying on the couch. It's amazing.
Exactly what it was. His big hairy body. Stanley Martin Lever nude on a couch, but he, just essentially passed himself off as this. He was this Malibu guy. He was a socialite, and I don't think he ever sold a fucking thing. He made a terrible deal with New World, essentially the Fantastic Four movie that Corman did, and what was that, 89? Like that was an evidence of how terrible a deal maker Stan was, because he wasn't able to impute any value on these things. You almost got the you love to quote that it
was always like a going out of business sale where he's just like throwing these things away. Sale. Yeah.
The idea that the Spider-Man movie where they said, well, he's got to become a spider by the end of the movie, right? That's the point of Spider-Man. It's like we almost had a fucking gross out Corman movie where Peter Parker became a human, disgusting man spider by the very end of the movie.
Well, there was a period in which people in their 40s remember where there was a time where everybody's assumed comic books will never work if you try to do them accurately on the screen. You have to change them fundamentally to like make them work or make them more accessible to a wide audience. But starting around like the mid-aughts, people started to realize, you know what, maybe you actually can just do the stories more or less like we remember in the comics, and people will love it, whether that's Sam Raimi's Spider-Man or Christopher Nolan's Batman or whatever the case might be. But conventional wisdom throughout the 80s and 90s is that these characters will never work on the big screen. But then surprise, surprise, once they actually started trying to do comic book accurate interpretations, they started to work. We're going back to Deadpool and Wolverine, which is, once again, it took a quarter century to prove that people like seeing Wolverine in the tights. But for the long, people still are fighting against that conventional wisdom that the comic books as written will never work. But for my money, it's always like, all these amazing artists and all these amazing writers have already done all the heavy lifting. They've given you the roadmap. They've given you this incredible mythology, this incredible like legendarium of stories and characters. Just trust it. Like, just once again, I think that's why Civil War worked so well in 2016. They just leaned into the concept created by Mark Miller. They didn't try to do like a panel for panel recreation, but that they more or less kept the spirit of the concept intact. And surprise, surprise, the movie fucking rocked.
Yeah, man. Look, so what you got Jazz, you got superhero comics, and you got Mormon. Are honestly like the three like things that you can only make in America that somehow
Westerns. You gotta add Westerns.
Right, and it's like those things can wind up being adapted by other cultures and made into whatever you want. They're sort of amorphous things. They have a lot of shelf life. But in terms of like distinctly American art forms, like baseball, jazz, and superhero comics, like it proved its worthiness decades ago, and for some reason people just still thought of it as if it was juvenilia, immature, infantile juvenilia that was based on, I guess that was the whole Frederick Wortham thing, which we don't need to go over that again, but that was like a 10 or 15 or 20 year roadblock or pit stop that comic books had to go through, and they only recently crawled out of it in the late 80s, early 90s or something like that.
Yeah, I mean that is a prevalent attitude that we're still fighting to the present day. Where like if you're into reading comics or manga or whatever, then you must be like a child molester or in a state of arrested development and all this stuff. And these are people who they don't read. Like they illiterate idiots. I've always failed to recognize the value of comics. But yeah, if you go back to the late '60s and read those FF issues starring Dr. Doom, like the character is there, and it's almost like you could imagine like if you got Robert Downey Jr. just to do like an audiobook reading Dr. Doom from the late 60s, it's like you would be like 90% of the way there to where you need to get in these movies.
Yeah, it's true. That's why, I think that I'm not so sure they're going to make him just straight up a new character named Victor Von Doom. It would be awesome if they did. I still think that we may see the vestige of duplicates and doppelgangers and whatever the fuck you call them, time display variants, which is so tedious, and it was exactly the wrong idea. And I could have told them if they'd asked me at the first part, but Feige panicked, and I think that was right on the cusp between Iger leaving and Bob Chapek coming in. And so like he really needed to step up to make the Disney shareholders happy. And Marvel, Disney was relying on Marvel as much as they were relying on their parks division to really kind of like have this
Stay
ridiculous.
alive.
Stay not just stay alive, but everybody get in the C-suite to get
What
rich.
what was mind-boggling to me was that Marvel and DC at the exact same time with their movie franchises decided we're all just going to do the exact same storyline over and over again. Every movie is going to be about the multiverse. Like, since when does every single comic have to be about, or every single movie adaptation of a comic have to be about the exact same storyline, whether that's The Flash or Deadpool and Wolverine or whatever? I'm so fucking sick of multiverse storylines, or Spider-Man No Way Home. It's like we are allowed to have stories about something other than the goddamn multiverse. And my least favorite parts about Deadpool and Wolverine, every single scene involving the time variance authority. I'm like, please just kill all these characters and let's move on. It was introduced in that show Loki, which I can't stand that show. I know season 1 had its defenders. They've never been remotely interesting to me in any way, shape, or form. And I'm ready for the multiverse never to be mentioned. Like, put it on a shelf for 50 years before you even breathe the word multiverse ever again.
You know, I didn't hate in the comic books. I for some reason I never developed the antipathy to the multiverse in the comic books as I did with the feature film stuff.
Because it's used in small doses.
It was, but it was so. But then again, it got heavily lent on in many cases over the years. I remember it wasn't just a matter of reading like What If comics, which was a great escapist line. I mean, that was a great supplement to what was going on. But when they were like trying to tell you that Deathlock was in one time variant reality, and Death's Head from Marvel UK. Like, they did wind up creating all these pocket universes.
And Deathlock, drawn by Zek, was a bad motherfucker. That classic cover of Captain America where it's just Deathlock pointing his gun like toward the audience or toward the reader. When you see Captain America like in the crosshairs, one of Zek's best. And I know you are a Zek enthusiast.
I am a Zek purist, yeah, and that's the thing. To pivot back to the '84 Secret Wars, Mike Zeck is a guy that I think a lot of people in comics, or if you are fans of comics, and I guess if you're our age, you know who he is. But the thing is, it's like there are very few superstar artists now who are working in comics because you can't make a living in comic books. So a lot of the guys who are working in comics,
the industry committed suicide. They committed harikari. But in the 1980s, Zek was a bad motherfucker. Punisher, Captain America, Secret Wars, the goddamn Kraven's Last Hunt. I mean, Jesus Christ, it is drool-inducing stuff.
When I was going back through Secret Wars this time, I guess I've read it. We were going to do this. We did prep in 21 for it as a potential topic. I read it.
You pitched it in 2020 during COVID, like, hey, let's talk about Secret Wars. I was and at the time I was like, oh, I don't know if it'll get any clicks. But here we are 4 years later. I'm like, do you still want to do that idea? I think it's got some merit.
It's coming right at us. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's the 40th anniversary. I think it was this summer or this spring. I think it dropped in the like June or May of.
It started in May of '84 and then ran through May of '85, and then they went right into Secret Wars 2, which sucked ass.
Yeah, you might want to. Everyone, you might want to.
Dude, I've got a trade paperback of the entire Secret Wars 2 here. Apart from this John Byrne cover, which is beautiful, it is unreadable. Like age 9, I kept reading it and I was like, why is this not like, I mean, it never even occurred to me that a comic could be good or bad when I was 9. I would read any comic, but if you compare it to Secret Wars, yeah, night and day.
Here's the thing. Mike Zeck was an artist. His style was very at home in the avant-garde of the early 80s. Mike Zeck's style is sort of like a child of John Buscema, more so than like Neil Adams or that kind of dynamic school of artist. He looks like he came up more through the other way of like the bullpen. I think Mike Zeck maybe even was a bullpen raider. One of John Romita's raiders in the bullpen for a while. And that'll come.
Is it heresy to say that I like him more than Buscema and I like him more than Neil Adams? Because I do.
You know what? There are certain things he's done. Here's the thing. I'll
like
say
that
about
cover of Wolverine scratching against Captain America's shield. It's like.
The covers, the actual pencils he did on the Punisher, the first, I think it was a 6-issue limited series, the very first Punisher limited series, 1985. I think he did that. His artwork is so stripped down. It's great. It's beautiful looking. The thing about 84 Secret Wars is that, we haven't even talked about the weird genesis about how that even came to be, how it was essentially the comic book arm of was it Kenner or Mattel? The idea that the action figure company came to Marvel Comics and they said, look, we want to make figures out of your characters, but you got to give us something to sell them through. And so Jim Shooter kind of like went home that weekend and he was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do, but they told him it's like apparently the word secret
Total War and Doctor Doom's the bad guy.
Yeah, right. But the word Secret Wars was like their testing said these two words work well together. So whatever you make, call it Secret Wars, and it's like it's true. It's endured for 40 years.
Yeah, it's like calling something Masters of the Universe. So you have no idea what it is, but you're like, that sounds fucking cool. Secret War sounds badass. And there was even Secret War, the Brian Michael Bendis, and then of course they brought it back with Hickman. It's a cool goddamn title, and here we are in 2024. There people are still capitalizing on it.
Yeah. So the thing is Zek was brought in knowing full well there's going to be 12 issues, and Jim Shooter, hearkening back to his hard-on reputation, Jim Shooter wanted his artist to it was immutable and unwavering. You needed to make deadlines. Every 4 weeks, you needed to hit that fucking deadline.
Yeah, the comics coming out whether you're ready or not.
And the thing is, the comics were often not ready, and they would get out. So when you look at the pencils for this, like, first of all, I think Bob Layton, who's also a great artist, he was the penciler in Iron Man when I started reading Iron Man comics in the late 80s. He did the Armor Wars. Like his stuff was completely at home in the technophilic late 80s.
Obsessed with the Armor Wars.
Oh, it's insane. It's sick. Michelini, and that's another one. Maybe they'll figure that out sometimes too. They were going to do that as a limited series. I don't know what the fate of Armor Wars is, but it could be a sick ass series. But the thing is that Zek was given 12 issues. Was only able to, I think, do 8 or 9 of them. And towards the end, his stuff is so sketchy. His panels are so filled in by Romita's Raiders. They're so corrected. And you can actually, there's a whole page in the last issue that was actually drawn by Art Adams, uncredited. And you can look from page to page where they just got people to come in and
it's this page.
That's it. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful page.
Yeah.
It's fucking Arthur Adams. It's not Mike Zeck.
Yeah, no, when you get to it, you're like, well, this looks kind of cool, but it looks different. But, age 8, age 9, when I'm reading this stuff, the idea that, like, somebody actually wrote a comic or drew a comic never even would occur to me. It was all just Secret Wars. And I think of all the giant crossovers that Marvel ever did, or giant events or maxi series, whatever you want to call them, I think I've read the original Secret Wars more than any other, apart from maybe the Dark Phoenix saga, which I just read over and over and over again. But what I think is what makes it hold up so well now, in some ways even superior, that ways are superior to Hickman's 2015 one. You can read Secret Wars 1 through 12 as a self-contained story. I got to add a little kind of context. When Secret Wars started coming out, all the characters, like in their own books, they all basically jumped ahead a year. So suddenly in the pages of Spider-Man, he was wearing the black suit. And suddenly in the pages of Fantastic Four, She-Hulk was a member. And everybody's like, what the fuck? Like, how did everything change? And they kept saying, to understand all these changes, check out Secret Wars, which is on sale now. But we had to wait over the course of an entire year to see where the black suit came from, to see why She-Hulk joined the Fantastic Four and that sort of thing. And it was so cool. But like, you didn't have all these tie-ins going every throughout you could just enjoy it as like its own story. But when you read the Secret Wars from 2015, the first few issues feel very self-contained. Then the last few issues, you're like, oh, well, I need to read these other comics to understand this time jump and that sort of thing. And I feel like, if you want to do a great maxi series or a great crossover, if you can just do a self-contained storyline, it will have like enormous, I guess a very long shelf life in a way where you don't have to buy 10 other books in order to understand what's going on. And I think that's what makes it so satisfying, even to the present day. 40 years fucking later, I can still sit down and read it and enjoy it like I'm an 8-year-old kid again.
Well, not for nothing. The original Secret Wars had incredible numbers. It was a hit out of the box. I mean, I don't think until 92 or 91 did comic books match the sales. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's possible that Crisis also hit similar numbers.
I mean, how do you not generate numbers with a cover like this? I mean, Mike Zeck just like coming all over your face, giving you like one of the most iconic images in the history of Marvel Comics. It is so goddamn gorgeous.
Yeah. And Mike Zeck, he was a cover artist by nature. It turns out that he just was not built for the grind of doing interiors. But it's like, Jamie, what you said before about Craven's Last Hunt. After I read this again, I needed to go back, and it's been a long time since I read Craven's Last Hunt. And it's like, that's the real Zeck. Zeck had plenty of time. He does such marvelous things with the layout. I
think it's the best Spider-Man story ever written.
There's a fair. It's hard to argue. I think, especially that period of time, because Peter David was working on Spectacular, and so he was doing the Sin Eater, the Death of Jean DeWolf stuff. Again, all peak Jim Shooter type stuff. And again, all stuff that was designed because Jim Shooter was like riding his fucking editors and writers to the fact they hated him and they made great work at that exact time. And so, yeah, like the Kraven's Last Hunt is probably the best Zek pencils you're going to find because Zek did not really do work beyond covers into the late 80s, early 90s. And you know what? Zek, for the past 25 years, has been living off of commissions. Like,
you think anybody at Sony has ever read Kraven's Last Hunt? Like, they got a movie called Kraven coming out in December, and I'm like, it would blow my mind if anybody working on that movie or working on that studio is even aware of Kraven's Last Hunt. But if they had made a movie of that, it'd be the coolest R-rated dark superhero movie ever made, or supervillain.
Let's just assume that Becky Deanna, our dear friend, because she is in some way tangential to selling these things, that she has heard of it. I
sent her the covers. I sent her many of the covers. Like, just put these into the movie.
I'm positive her coworkers and whoever's in charge of Sony has no idea what it is. But I'm going to assume that her nerd bona fides is such that she is aware of it tangentially. Hopefully, she can use it to sell it. But they've already made the movie.
As soon as I saw the trailer where he's getting powers from like animal blood going in his, I was like, oh, this is gonna be the dumbest fucking thing I've ever seen. But anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked. Back to Mike Zeck.
Yeah, Mike Zeck. So yeah, Mike Zeck has been living off of commissions. He has not done interior work. So far as I know, the last interior work Mike Zeck did was DC's extenuation of Kingdom Come. They did like a sequel series to Kingdom Come in the late 1990s. And the same thing, Mike Zeck tried doing, I think, 6 or 8 issues. Mark Waid wrote it, and his work was not up to the snuff of his covers. I mean, look at those Captain America covers. Honestly, it's like a fucking 101 on just pure visual storytelling to sell a comic in the old days when that was what they were, you had to win the spinner rack, and Mike Zeck was the fucking champion of the spinner rack.
Totally. Yeah. And that, I mean, once again, going back to Secret Wars and just like the first few issues are more or less drawn exclusively by him. He just makes all the characters seem so goddamn badass. And Jim Shooter really understands what makes all these characters tick as well. It's like, no matter which villains you're a fan of, or which heroes you're a fan of, at that time, it was one of the coolest interpretations of those characters. Like you're seeing how Hulk is like starting. He'd been, he had his brain for a while, and you can see he's starting to lose his mind again due to a nightmare fucking with him. And at that time, the Incredible Hulk comic was leading up to issue 300, where he was going to go batshit insane again. But every single month in the top left-hand corner, you could see him slowly but surely getting like crazier and like I remember at the beginning of the arc, it was Bruce Banner like in his suit, like holding a vial and he drops it like a beaker, and then you can see like the slow metamorphosis. But like that was unfolding in Incredible Hulk, while at the same time in Secret Wars he was also starting to come unglued. But initially he's almost talking like Reed Richards, and by the end he's like, "Get out of my way, Hawkeye," and he's like all pissed off and grumbly again. So you had these cool little ongoing storylines, or Spider-Man losing his web shooters and then getting the black suit. Or in the pages or the X-Men, you see like Storm and Cyclops and Professor X are all kind of competing for who should be the leader of the X-Men, because Storm was the leader of the X-Men. Professor X had learned to walk again, so he wanted to be the leader. And Cyclops is like, well, I've got the most experience, so I should be the leader. So you got all that internal turmoil, but you have all these like great little subplots going on. And then you have all these amazing subplots with the villains. Like Dr. Doom decides to invent 2 new villains once they arrive. And so you've got, the Absorbing Man falling in love with Titania, who's like one of the best new characters there. And then you got Molecule Man, aka, you were Owen Reese before you now you're Zaji. Yeah. You got Molecule Man realizing his full potential. And so it was like the perfect soap opera for an 8-year-old boy. Like I wasn't going to watch The Days of Our Lives, but I was going to read Secret Wars. And it's written as like the world's greatest soap opera, but every single issue has maximum violence. And like at one point you think Wasp is dead. At one point you think She-Hulk is dead. Like there's so many consequences and stakes that ordinarily were missing from like regular comics. Or like when Wolverine hacks off the Absorbing Man's arm while he's in stone form, like suddenly it felt like there were real stakes to this war, this secret war. And that was new compared to what I'd read in the years leading up to it.
Yeah, I thought, reading it back, everything that was happening parallel with Secret Wars that was going on in Fantastic Four, it was going on in X-Men. I see that Shooter was he was the EIC of all of that stuff. He did not edit comics individually, but he edited the course of the company. So he was, like you said, the punch list of things that went out under his guise. Frank Miller got that work doing Daredevil at that point.
Shooter said that when he met Frank Miller, and this is during the high school speech, he said, when I first met Frank Miller, he was living out in fields talking to cows, and he's like, and I turned him into a superstar.
And he absorbed. Shooter was doing an approximation of the voices of the authors who were writing these groundbreaking comics. So Daredevil and Frank Miller wasn't a part of it, but he was doing a yeoman's job at trying to encapsulate that Chris Claremont voice. And Chris Claremont, much like Wolfman over at DC at that point, who was doing Teen Titans, I think from 83 onwards, maybe 82, 83 onwards, at least the ones that everybody remembers, Chris Claremont had almost like innovated that soap opera sound for sure. And so it's wild watching Jim Shooter approximate, almost like create the drama that Chris Claremont was doing so easily. He was trying to like cram it into 12 issues and make sure that people knew that it's like, well, Claremont would do this. Claremont would have the contest for leadership between these three strong-willed individuals. So there's a lot of internal monologue.
Or Colossus falling in love with Zaji and that sort of thing. That's a great little sub. Like initially it's Human Torch, but then at one point he calls her like a chippy or something like that. And Colossus like, Chippy, she's not a chippy. He gets all upset. But anyway, he falls because he was in love with Kitty back home. And he betrays her and falls in love with Zaji off-world. And it's like, but once again, pure soap opera territory.
Yeah. The only thing I thought that was cloying. I'm like, he understood Colossus because again he read the Marginalia, he read Claremont's, but Claremont gave him more of a soul. And I see he wasn't able to synthesize anything in Colossus other than like a pining teenager. He was just such a hopeless.
But I love it when he catches the ship before it's about to crash and like opens up his wounds again as they're about to fight Galactus. He's got his hero moments. And then his best hero moment, he's like, forgive me, Zaji. Like, I say we fight. And then Doom nukes. It's the end of issue 11. They're having a big roundtable conversation. And the vote has to be unanimous. Doom has become omnipotent. They're debating whether or not they should challenge him. And they're going around the table, and everybody's making their case. And Colossus is the deciding vote. And he starts crying. He says, forgive me, Zaji, but I say we fight. And the whole group gets just... Well, I'll just bring out the page. The whole group gets nuked beyond all recognition, and for an 8-year-old to see everybody die in one page at the same time, I was like, "Oh yeah, there we go." I was like, "What the fuck?" Like to see the Avengers, the FF, the X-Men, everybody die all at once. That was the snap from Infinity War for 1984. It was a major moment. But I think when it comes to the voice, I think Shooter does Cap really well. I think he does Doom really well. And it all trickles down from there. But like in this, Doom and Cap are like, they're such symbolic figures for both sides. And they're the leaders. They're kind of like the two generals kind of working against each other. And I think while he might not necessarily get every voice right, but he does a damn good Spidey and he does a damn good Human Torch. And he does it. But with Rhodey, he sometimes, it's almost like a 1970s like blaxploitation flick, like almost like talking jive. Like when he flies down to flirt with Captain Marvel and things like maybe you're not getting Rhodey perfect, but he does try to, in his own way, to do Rhodey as well as humanly possible. He's like, I got this suit on, I'm one bad dude, and like, things like that. Like, it's hilarious seeing how he interprets all these different characters that, once, like you said, are being brought to life by so many other writers in their own books.
Yeah, I thought he really, you know what? I kind of loved his Absorbing Man. I thought his Absorbing Man was so loquacious. I didn't realize how much dialogue he gave him more dialogue than he did Dr. Octopus. Than the Wrecker and the Wrecking Crew.
The Wrecking Crew and Absorbing Man, they were never depicted better than in Secret Wars.
Yeah, there's something. And by the way, I had a little bit of trivia about this because you mentioned Titania, who there were two characters who were, well, I guess three characters who were purpose created. The
Spider-Woman, Titania, and Volcana. Yeah.
Right. So Titania, her real name, what was it? She was like some citizen of. I guess she was in the town that was like sort of.
When the Beyonder makes Battleworld, he takes pieces of a bunch of different planets. From Earth, he takes a little, I think it's like maybe Denver. He takes a neighborhood from Denver, and that's where Sydney Sweeney's her Spider-Woman comes from.
That's true. And she looks really on model what you've seen so far. Yeah. But Titania's name, the character name, her name was Mary Skeeter Mary Skeeter McFerrin, and that was true to the whole bullpen form. There was a woman who worked at Marvel Comics named Mary McFerrin, and her nickname was Skeeter. And when I did an internship there in 1995, and Mary Mac was the intern coordinator. She had a number of different jobs along the way. She was a lifer. She had worked there a long time. Like John Romita was the art director for a good long time. Mary Mac had been in one position after another. And so when I went to work there, when I did my internship interview, she says, "Hi, I'm Mary McFerrin." And I was like looking for the spikes on her suit. And I'm like, "Do you know that you have the same name as Titania?" And she says, "Yeah, I know that."
Classic bully, and but what I love about her, she's powerful as fuck. Like I think it's the beginning of issue 4, the one where the mountain gets dropped on them, and everybody's like hurling debris at them in the distance, and she picks up this giant chunk of like the wrecked base, and Absorbing Man goes, "Holy!" when they see just how strong she really is. But she's the classic bully when she gets beat up by Spider-Man because she can't hit him. And that was a part of her character for years, where she had this like psychological block where she was nervous about ever meeting Spider-Man because he was so quick. But I love her character and the way Absorbing Man always calls her legs. And like, it's just the way the villains are brought to life with just as much love and affection as the heroes, if not more so. And just watching all their behind the scenes gossip. And I guess at one point, one of them's making fun of Molecule Man, and I think it's a bulldozer or pile driver, but he turns his he turns his suit into armor. He falls down. They start like stepping on his face in the mud, but like it's like playground shit. But for an 8-year-old, reading all that playground shit was just delightful. So once again, Titania, Absorbing Man, and the Wrecking Crew were you need bruisers in a war to be like the cannon fodder, and they were the perfect bruisers for this drama.
By the way, do you happen to have a clip of how Dr. Doom maybe got those powers?
Which clip would you like me to to throw down? Doom panel 4, the one where he's fighting the Beyonder?
Yeah. How about that one?
All right. So just to tee it up properly, for people who have not read it, part of the gist of it is that the Beyonder says, slay your enemies, and I'll give you your wildest imagination. Whatever you want will be yours. Blah blah blah. So he basically just wants to watch TV and have all these people fight. And at a certain point, Galactus decides that he's going to absorb his own ship in order to get enough power in order to take on the Beyonder. Dr. Doom decides to slice up Claw into a million little pieces and find a way to redirect all the energy into him, giving him just enough power where he might be able to take on the Beyonder. And then the infinite wisdom of Bill Scurry, he brought on Moose Matson, my co-dungeon master in my ongoing D&D campaign, who also does the voice for the Savage Realms monthly magazine. We all love and adore Moose Matson as the hobo with the high kick, but these days he also makes a living as a voice actor, and he was kind enough to do the voice acting for some of these clips prepared by Bill Scurry. So here we are, Moose Matson as Doom fighting the Beyonder.
And in the realm of the Beyonder, is there no end to his strength? He doubles and redoubles his onslaught with each passing second. I must draw nearer still, and yet all my power is not enough. My thrust has been blunted, my energy ebbs, my defenses crumble. It is hopeless. I cannot reach him any more than the anvil can rise to strike the hammer. A way there must be! Ah! Thus falls Doom. No! What is pain to one such as I? I will shut it out. Other men fall prey to the very specter of death when her cold embrace seems imminent. They simply swoon into her arms, but I am Doom! I deny you death! Victor Von Doom must not die!
So for the nerds, or the nerds out there who have not yet had the privilege, Secret Wars number 10 is when Dr. Doom takes on the Beyonder, and as a little kid, seeing that cover where he's covered in lacerations and his armor's falling apart, and as you brought to life in that clip, when his leg falls off during the fight, I remember like, holy shit! And then like the Beyonder almost starts like dissecting him into little pieces, because he's like David and Goliath. He has this secret weapon kind of contained in his breastplate, but he has to get within arm's reach of the Beyonder to use it. And the Beyonder, as he's coming in to kind of figure out who is this Victor Von Doom, that's when Doom's able to unleash the David Stone toward the Goliath, and he takes the Beyonder's power. They never really quite explain what that sling is, but anyway, he takes his powers. And for the next 2 issues, Doom is omnipotent. He's omniscient. He can do anything he wants, and it makes the last 2 issues quite epic.
That's the masterstroke of all the stuff that Shooter managed to do. I mean, there's the idea of like taking all the toys and just squishing them together and like banging G.I. Joe against Transformers and everybody in the same sandbox and creating that like, oh, Masters of the Universe is going to fight Ninja Turtles. And that's just what we're doing in the tub while we're having a bath. And he got that from the first issue onwards. But then he had to sort of come up with all the plot works of it. And that's where he starts plumbing the real Stan and Jackness of it. And the cover with Doctor Doom is one of the first images that sort of leaps out. There's a couple of like iconic cover things that even though you haven't read it, you're waiting to get to it because you know it's on the docket. The cover of Dark Knight #1 is one of those things. But it's like the moment where he cuts up Claw, who's a character who'd been banging around since the late 1960s, sort of a weird, idiosyncratic Fantastic Four villain. And he's like, he uses Claw in such a way that he cuts them up into like lenses. He creates an apparatus. It's like it is very much Kirby.
And Claw's made of sounds. He doesn't mind. He's just a head with like his brain removed. They find his head just lying around, but it doesn't seem to bother him at all.
I just like you said, there's some weird MacGuffin inside Doom's chest plate. And it's like, you know what? Doom knew what it was, and Shooter knew that we needed something like that. It's kind of like pure comic books where you just say enough without going all the way, and you don't have to get over diagrammatic with it. This is exactly the sort of stuff that Hickman thrives with the sequel doing in 2015.
And he does a similar thing with how Doom becomes omniscient before his Secret Wars arc as well. He and Doctor Strange and Molecule Man go to confront the Beyonders, and there's a situation where either Strange or Doom has to claim omniscience, and Strange kind of demurs. He's like, it's too big for me. And Doom's like, I'll take this. But what was great about issue 10 of Secret Wars is how there was this escalation. Like with issue 8, when Spidey gets the black suit, they'd had the big fight at the Doom base where they beat the fuck out of all the villains. Then in issue 9, it's all the heroes against Galactus. Then issue 10, it's Doom versus the Beyonder. It's like with each issue, the stakes get bigger and the fights get grander. And it's just like it keeps escalating. And finally, in issue 12, it's the omniscient Doom versus all the heroes. And just, it's like for the last third of it, it just kept building and building and building. And it just got better and better and better. It was a hell of a time to be a comic book dork.
Yeah, it was definitely, it set the standard. It reestablished the benchmark of how popular Marvel Comics were. And Marvel was addicted to sales after that. I mean, it might have been the very first crossover of that kind of magnitude. The fact that Secret Wars 2 wound up proliferating in its own limited series, but it also had at least 3 issues of like every single Marvel comic that was running monthly. So
what starts with Secret Wars 2, which is a trend I've always hated ever since, is that you've got the Secret Wars 2 central storyline, but then you got all the tie-ins with all the books. Like there's an issue of Web of Spider-Man where he's trying to rescue people from a collapsed golden building because the Beyond are just like, oh, people are poor? I'll turn this building into gold. Now people aren't poor anymore. And then it collapses on its own weight and Spider-Man has to go in there and save people. But it was like you couldn't understand Secret Wars 2 unless you were also reading Web of Spider-Man. I've always resented being kind of squeezed or manipulated where you have to buy all these other books to understand the main one, once again, which is why the first Secret Wars works so great. You can just read it from start to finish as is. Secret Wars 2, you cannot. And the same holds true with Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars from 2015. You have to read all these other books to understand what's going on in it. And I don't like being gouged to buy books that I don't want.
Well, that's, I'm trying to think of. So Crisis took place over, it was just in a run of a miniseries. Again, it was the prototypical comic book gigantic miniseries event. And they did not know enough to drag it through every single mainstream title. Granted, it proliferated with changes through the monthly books, but there wasn't necessarily the tie-ins that you needed to buy to understand it. The thing with the Hickman version in 2015, I went in cold when I read it in 2015. Only subsequent readings did I bother going back and seeing what the paper trail, the breadcrumb trail was getting to there.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, there's a giant collection leading up to it. I don't want to get too into Hickman yet, but just to let people know, this collection contains Avengers 35 to 44, New Avengers 24 to 33, and then you dive into Secret Wars 1 to 9. And there's a giant omnibus coming in December, a giant hardbound edition, obviously in anticipation of the Secret Wars movie.
I think that Well, again, I'm living proof that you can go into Hickman's Secret Wars cold and it works as a standalone. If you have a grounding with some of these characters, because it is so recombinant, one of the great things that Hickman does, he's able to use the concepts really liberally and flexibly, and that is its strength. He's just such a great adapter of comic book lore. The same way, he wasn't trying to imitate anybody's voice, but he's doing a lot of the same syncretic things that Shooter was doing with the 84
Yeah,
series.
and there's little nods to what has come before. His brilliant Fantastic Four and FF run, and then his incredible run on Avengers. He knows how to exploit things from the past. Like the Molecule Man in Secret Wars becomes one of the coolest characters imaginable, and he'd always been just kind of like this disposable loser leading up to that. But I'm sure he read Secret Wars in 1984, fell in love with Molecule Man, and then brought him back and made him cool again in his own stuff. But what I don't want people to overlook or forget is that prior to Doom and the Shooter Secret Wars stealing the power of the Beyonder, he's really cool throughout all of it. Like the fact that he invents Titania and Volcana because he needs additional minions. The fact that he just casually kills Kang. Kang at one point tries to shoot him down, and he does. And Doom's like, all right, one of you tried to kill me. And Kang's like, oh, but Doom, like, you're going to need me. And Doom he has Ultron kill him then and there. He reprograms Ultron and has Ultron just atomized Kang. Like, he's so hardcore, so badass. I think Shooter really understood Doom has to be a badass threat, and he's always got to be plotting and scheming. In issue 1, when Galactus is like, I'm not going to participate in this stupid competition. I demand your power now. Like, take my hunger away from me. I'm tired of being hungry all the time. And he flies up to meet the Beyonder, and Doom's like, there's knowledge and power to be gained. And he flies like in the kind of the bubble alongside him. And so it's Doom and Galactus flying up to confront the Beyonder in issue 1. The Beyonder knocks him aside like flies. Doom barely survives. But like from issue 1, Doom's like, I don't want to play this game either. Like, I'm Doom. I want knowledge. I want power. And he's always plotting and scheming and manipulating all the villains. And so I feel like, yeah, he is the star of the story. As great as Cap is depicted in it, the real protagonist of the Secret Wars storyline is Victor Von Doom. And it's my genuine, sincere hope that the MCU will find a way to allow Victor Von Doom to be the protagonist of at least one movie, the same way that Thanos felt like the protagonist of Avengers Infinity War. Let the villain be the star. And I think you will once again see these movies making like $2.5 billion.
I can't imagine that they haven't learned that lesson. The fact that they're bringing back the writer or one of the two writers, McFeely, who worked on that spine, like so that 4-movie core of the Thing, they were able to put together the story of Thanos from these disparate pieces, all the underwhelming introduction of Thanos in Guardians of the Galaxy. And was it Guardians of the Galaxy 2? I can't remember where he actually.
No, 1 is when he first appears because Ronan the Accuser comes to see him, and he ends up like breaking the neck of that one of Thanos' servants and blah blah blah. But yeah, it was an underwhelming first big presentation. After we'd seen him in the credits for Avengers in 2012, in 2014 we saw him in Guardians, and I was like, well, that wasn't very good. But then when we saw the trailer for Infinity War, like, ooh, this might be really good.
Yeah, they did something that you didn't know they could do, which is essentially they hired a guy who can get the job done. They had the mocap, a little dots on Brolin's face made it easy for him to give a performance. I think you have to understand now they've had so many years of working with Downey. Downey knows what it takes to make one of these gigantic monsters. All the special effects work, all the compositing, the tone. I mean,
but we're coming from 5 years of mediocrity. You would think Marvel knows how to make all the trains run on time at this point. But if you compare the last 5 years to the previous 10 years, the last 5 years, apart from Deadpool and Wolverine, the success of Deadpool and Wolverine, it's been incredibly disappointing. So if anything, it's almost like they've forgotten everything they learned in the first 10 years.
You would think that Lucasfilm would know how to make an Indiana Jones movie, but after you watch the fucking Dial of Destiny, it's almost like they gave it to a bunch of Hungarian sweatshop workers and said, please translate this out of Magyar into English and make whatever you think is the best story, owing, to know nothing about the actual brand itself. And it's like, these things get away really easily.
I think the reality is a lot of people in Hollywood just don't watch movies. Like, they don't consume their own product, or they don't understand their own product. It's like they're going to the salt mines, to borrow an expression from Simon O'Neill. Like, I'm off to the salt mine for the day. It's just a job. They're working on a construction site or whatever, and they really don't care. But you can always tell when there's a filmmaker who does. Like, James Gunn cares about these characters, and there's certain filmmakers who understand what makes these characters tick. So I really, truly hope that in spite of all their success in the past, the Russo brothers have had so much success, that they'll slow down and be like, all right, who were the writers over the last 60 years who've given us the best versions of Doom. And I would say that's Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, that's John Byrne, it's Jonathan Hickman. Like there's certain writers who really understand how to make him the legend that he is. Or one of my all-time favorites, Roger Stern and Mike Mignola did a team up between Dr. Doom and Dr. Strange, where Dr. Doom wants to rescue the soul of his mother from Mephisto, and he needs Dr. Strange help. It's so fucking good. It'll make your head spin. And this is the one that has the great line, pain is like love, like compassion. It is a thing only for lesser men. What is pain to Doom? It's like, that is his personality. He looks upon everybody as like insignificant nothingness. Like, or in the beginning of the kind of lead up to Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars, when Submariner comes to visit him to complain about the Cabal kind of getting a little carried away, and Doom's like, we're aristocrats. Like, let us talk to one another as aristocrats. He's so fucking arrogant. It is astonishing. You have to find a way to make him the world's biggest goddamn snob.
Well, there's that one clip that, again, we did with Moose where he kind of, after Reed Richards sort of bitches at him a little bit, he goes, I know that you put yourself back on a throne again. And he has a very good rejoinder about that.
All right. So is that the one with Richards and Spidey talking to him?
Yes. That's
all right. Let's let that fucker rip.
Yes. I did what you and all of your ilk could not. I saved the unsavable in the face of total annihilation. I am a miracle worker. But here you are, so you must be as well.
We built a ship. All we saved was ourselves. I can't help but notice you decided to put yourself on a throne.
Yeah. We're all absolutely shocked by that. Just floored.
A throne. I've had a throne for quite some time. A throne was my birthright. I've placed myself a good bit higher than that.
Yeah, I mean, just hilarious. And also, for people who are watching this, I'm going to include a link down below to Moose Matson's YouTube channel and Twitter profile. And also, I'll include a link to where you can buy some of his Savage Realms monthly magazines, or it's audio fiction. But anyway, it's for people who love fantasy fiction as well as audiobooks. Definitely check out Savage Realms monthly. But yeah, as I was watching some of these clips that you and Moose prepared, I was like, can y'all just do this for all my comics moving forward? Y'all make them so much goddamn fun. I'd rather watch stuff like that than like the late 60s animation, because I love word balloons. I love the comic book format, but I also love it when you get a little extra punch.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't, in terms of your live action Doom, I mean, it is kind of worth mentioning the other incarnations, good and for ill. I guess it's all been for ill so far, but I'll swing by the New World Corman version, not directed by Corman, but Corman made it, produced it, etc. Yep. The Fantastic Four, the misbegotten Fantastic Four movie. I love that suit. I mean, it may be like the walk around Disney World, like when you meet a version of Doctor Doom. However, up to that point, we've never seen a Doctor Doom suit, maybe outside of the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade where he's on the Marvel Comics float. Well, you can check it out. It's on YouTube. They used to have a Marvel Comics float, and Doctor Doom would be there with Green Goblin and Magneto and actors playing them on that Thanksgiving morning. But I think that,
and in 1994 really when they made it, comic book adaptations were in a weird place. Like we saw the live action Captain America where they suddenly made the Red Skull Italian instead of German. And I remember as a kid, I was like, wait a second, that's different. Like it's like,
it does not work.
The bar was very low apart from like Batman in 1989 and that sort of thing. But I've got that clip ready to rock. Here we go. Dr. Doom from 1994.
Pitiful. You are pitiful. Half the fun is the chase. You've robbed me of even that. Ah, well. At least you've left me the pleasure of the kill.
Not bad.
If Downey looks like that, I will take it. Honestly, no complaints, man.
I will take that over the 3 iterations we saw at Fox between Fantastic Four 1 and 2, and then the Fanfistifour, whatever that weird title the Josh Trank movie was. Every single time, Fan Four Stick or whatever they want to call it. it just wounded me. Like, if you love a character and you see these goddamn studios getting them wrong over and over and over, it's like seeing people get Sauron wrong in the Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, like, or any example, or seeing Captain Kirk as depicted in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I'm just like, leave these guys alone, like, do them justice or leave them alone. But anyway, Doctor Doom, to be fair, some of these comic book characters are really tough to crack. Like, I think Superman, very tough to adapt. Captain America, very tough to adapt. Fantastic Four, very tough to adapt. Like, I think the more pure and noble and kind of like idealistic certain characters are, the more difficult a nut it is to crack. And so it's why they keep getting Fantastic Four wrong. That spirit of like 60s idealism, the kind of Kennedy era that from which they sprang forth in the early 60s, it's very tough to do that without coming across as like cloying or cheesy or whatever the case might be. Not a lot of people know how to do it. Like The Incredibles, I think it's the closest we've come to kind of capturing that flavor, that spirit. It's family, it's science fiction, it's exploration, it's discovery, but it also has to really pop and so on. And so it's still going to be fun. It's really tough to do, and not a lot of storytellers can crack it.
But I mean, that's Brad Bird you're talking about. I mean, granted, Brad Bird has had a really weird track record after that in terms of live action animation, but they're working on a third one of those, but the two of them were excellent. First one is lightning in a bottle. And
I think I saw the first one like 4 times in the theater.
It's the essence of it. It's understood. I don't like the villain of the first one. I think that Syndrome was not a good villain, but whatever. That's besides the point. But like the two Tim Story, Fantastic Four, and FF Rise of the Silver Surfer. Tim Story might not have been the right director for it, but it's like they certainly did not cast the right actors for it. And that's one of the gigantic failings.
I mean, Jessica Alba's hot. I like Jessica Alba,
but she doesn't
maybe not Sue Storm.
Yeah, but also whatever the guy, Yoan Griffith, who played Reed Richards, was like dead on his fucking feet. And the guy from Nip Tuck, Julian McMahon's, this is the problem. It's like Julian McMahon's Dr. Doom. They gave him the shitty power that they invented in the Ultimates, which is where Dr. Doom was on board the rocket. Now, this is the other big kind of like fuck up with Dr. Doom, is like, how do you treat this guy? And so far, feature films have said he's got to be having powers with them too. He's got to be super powered.
Yeah, he has to share the same origin as the Fantastic Four. And it's like, no, Fantastic Four, they have their mission where they get their powers, and Dr. Doom's powers, he earned them. He studied magic. He studied science. Nobody gave Dr. Doom powers. He earned it the hard way. He might have inherited a throne by his birthright, but all of his abilities just come from sweat.
Innovation and toil. And you know what? Unfortunately, we credited Warren Ellis with coming up with the Extremis before. Warren Ellis was the one who gave Doom the moonshot origin in Ultimate Fantastic Four. I think it was 1 through 3.
And called him Victor Von Doom, which was just idiotic. It's like, don't turn him into a figure of ridicule. Doom, it's really tough to do. How do you make somebody who speaks in third person in such an arrogant way not ridiculous, where like you can love him and kind of laugh at him secretly, but also be terrified and in awe of him and of his accomplishments? Only a handful of writers have ever gotten it right. But you prepared a clip from the 2007 Fantastic Four. Tee it up. Give us some context.
Jesus, this is this is the fucking thing about this Fantastic Four. It was he steals the Silver Surfer's powers. I mean, they had it almost, all the pieces were almost
to
there.
Be fair, comes from the original Doomsday storyline from 1967.
Like they plundered the first one. They didn't plunder anything. The first Fantastic Four movie was an Sui Generis creation, so far as I know. But the second one had bits and pieces of really good DNA that they just squandered. And the version of the Silver Surfer was played by Doug Jones. It was voiced over by Lawrence Fishburne. That was all good. Actually, I think the Silver Surfer looked really good.
Yeah.
That's the problem, is that you were trying to
Galactus looked like diarrhea, but the Silver Surfer looked amazing.
Yeah, Doug Jones was the guy to do it. And it's like, oh, it's too bad it was squandered on the rest of this movie, which looks like it was made for dimes. But Dr. Doom in that one, it's like they went through the trouble of giving him the board. He stole Surfer's powers. Like, that at least was on point. That was like canon. He did it. So yeah, if you want to play it, we'll see what it looks like.
Let her rip.
once again, I think that Julian McMahon kept taking the mask off. One of the things about his Doctor Doom is that he, for most of the first movie, so far as I know, he was slowly turning into a metal being. Like his face was getting kind of wiry. He was starting to look like Ross Webster's sister from Superman 3 after she would turn into a robot. And I think, at least for the most part, I think that
which terrified me when I was 8 when I saw it in the theater.
It was scary as shit. But it's like this. It's like halfway there. You see that like Doom is screaming out for a good, legit, feature film interpretation where it's an actor playing it. It's lit correctly. There's good, it actually looks like a piece of armor and costuming.
But I always think his armor should look like it was designed 800 years ago. It should look like rusted, thick, like corrugated metal. It should be like medieval in appearance. I always feel like he's an interesting blend where he's wearing like medieval armor and all these robes, but he also has the high tech and the sorcery kind of tucked away. It shouldn't look so clean and polished and that sort of thing. I feel like because I remember from his origin story when he's having all of his servants make his armor, and he's already a little messed up from the experiment that went wrong. And it's like, master, like, don't put on the mask before it cools. He's like, what is pain to Doom? And he puts it on and kind of melts off the rest of his face. But I always feel like his mask should be like an inch thick and like really. I mean, it shouldn't look like something you buy at Toys R Us, which is how people typically do it.
Yeah. It's funny because if you look at the official handbook of the Marvel Universe that came out, what was it, 1980, 1982? John Byrne did the Doctor Doom page. And the way, I guess my canon version of Doctor Doom is the way John Byrne drew him. And John Byrne did exactly that, where, it was.
There's Doom as done by Byrne.
And it's the idea that, like, the tunic on top of the armor, it's all supposed to, like you say, it's supposed to look medieval. There is an old sense of a suit of armor, something that is like old Bavarian knights with halberds and flip-down faceplates. That's what went into Doctor Doom. And, the way John Byrne drew it is that there was no shortage of technology. It was an absolute marvel of miniaturization and, compact electronics that made Dr. Doom's armor just absolutely, invulnerable.
A great close-up of his eyes. There we go. So like you see the armor's thick, but you can still see like the scars and melted flesh around his eyes. That's how Doom's eyes should look, or at least because John Byrne was my first exposure to Doom, that's the way he's always locked in my brain.
And John Byrne also wasn't the only artist to do this, but like the heightened version of the fact that it's almost like he had metal eyebrows, which furrowed his brow.
That allows him to have expressions. Like same with Spider-Man, when you're drawing him, his eyes will change shape on his mask, which makes no sense. But in the comics, it makes pure emotional sense.
Exactly. Right. You have to use the form. Like, this is fucking comic books. It's got to look that way.
One of the movies have wisely done that. In the first Deadpool movie, I noticed his mask would change shape depending upon if he's like, or whatever. Like, you got to let the eyes move.
Yeah. One of the things, the penciler of the 2015, we haven't even mentioned his name yet. The penciler of the 2015 Secret Wars is what was he? He was a former Yugoslavian. I don't know which. Maybe Bosnian. Asad Ribic, yeah. And the guy, like, his work is so stunningly beautiful. And one of the things, he redesigned his version of Doom. Every artist who takes a swing at Doom kind of like draws their own version of it to some degree, because the mouth looks a little different in some cases. The armor is a little different. It's whatever the guy wants it to do to essentially be able to be expressions.
So here's a close-up of Asad Ribic's interpretation when he's facing the Beyonders, saying like, and they're like, who faces us? And he's like, I do. But the eye mask is very angular.
And what he does, he has this great thing where he actually, it's not a sealed mask. It looks like what he does is actually his mouth. When he opens his mouth up, you see teeth. It's almost as if it is like a piece of application he wears over his face, not like an astronaut's helmet or Iron Man armor. it's almost like a Man in the Iron Mask situation where he's able to, when he screams, the actual mouth opens up. You see him, his mandibles stretch you see his tongue curling in anger. And it's like, there's so much great expression that it's just like, what a great invention. I've never seen Doom like that before. I mean, for the most part, you do want it to be a sealed battle armor, right? With just eye holes. That's the way Iron Man should be too. It shouldn't be an exposed neck, but however, if for the process of making Doom a god, it's like, I think Ribic came up with an incredible design.
And for that era, I mean, I remained an avid comic book reader up through about 2016 or 17, where I just stopped abruptly and just kind of gave up on all comics all at once. But for that period, Asad Ribic was Hall of Fame. I was a massive fan of his approach.
And I think this was eight or nine issues. It was shorter than the
Nine.
original.
Yeah.
9, yeah. And I don't know how they did it. Maybe they gave Ribbich plenty of runway to close it. So the thing is, he does every panel. There's not a single skipped over line. There's no backup artist. There's no backgrounds drawn in. It is,
and this was after his Jason Aaron Thor run, right?
Yes. Yeah, that was based
he'd already made a huge impression on me with Thor and Jason Aaron. So I loved his style, and I was like, oh, perfect hire for Secret Wars.
He did, and if anybody's, if you're connecting it, he did all the stuff that they based Love and Thunder on, the Gore the Godslayer and all that stuff. Like, he invented that stuff.
Don't mention Love and Thunder. People won't look at the comic.
It was, well, look at the comic, right? Look at the comic, but his style was just so. It was like Walter Simonson,
mythological.
40 years forward. Yeah, it's a logical translation. It's so influenced by the classic Thor stuff. In fact, do you want to play the panel of Dr. Doom blowing up the Avengers at the beginning? His
totally.
reappearance?
Actually, before we do Dr. Doom blowing up the Avengers, we've been going 90 minutes. I have got to have a slash, as the old expression goes. So real quick, I'm going to do my wrong reel pee break, and when we come back, we'll do the official deep dive on Hickman's Secret Wars. All right, so let's get to the main event, Hickman's Secret Wars, which might end up being the last Marvel crossover that I will ever read. And I've just accepted. I had many decades of great comic book reading that gave me a lot of joy, and I'm happy for my Marvel comic book universe just to be from the early 60s up through like 2015 or 16. And then I feel like that alone contains enough stories to kind of keep me going for the rest of my life. But Jonathan Hickman, I cannot overemphasize this enough. When he got on Fantastic Four, and then he brought in FF as well, and then he went on New Avengers and Avengers, and then he went into Secret Wars, it felt like Secret Wars was the culmination of every single storyline that he'd been working on for that entire run, from Reed Richards and Dr. Doom to everything going on and with like the Illuminati and like with like, like Black Panther and Submariner fucking hating each other and that sort of thing. All that stuff was incredible, and it all builds this incredible crescendo. And and very fittingly, the climax is just Dr. Doom and Reed Richards beating the fuck out of each other with no powers. I was like, yes, that is exactly the ending that it should have. And it was a delight I ate a fistful of edibles, and I just went under for a couple of nights and read these two bad boys back to back. But for a day or so, I became a big, giant Marvel comic books nerd again. And yeah, it was just an absolute hoot and a half from start to finish.
By the way, do you want to pivot the graphic on the bottom of the page? Because we had an Assad Ribic version.
Absolutely. Let's do it. This one. Ba-da-ba-da. Look at that. Esad Ribbage.
Updated trade dress. Very
Yeah.
nice,
And
yeah.
once again, Doom at the very end of this book is when he did, basically, for people, just to give people some backdrop, all the multiverse is collapsing with these events where like certain worlds will basically encounter each other. They'll go to war, and whichever side wins, the other world evaporates and goes away. And they're going from like millions of worlds down to like basically by the end of it, 2, where you have like the ultimate world and like the regular world. And everybody's wondering which one will prevail. And for a while, you've got the Cabal, which is like the evil version of the Illuminati, helping decide which worlds will survive and which ones won't. So if you want to see Thanos and all these incredible villains basically just kicking ass left and right, it's very, very satisfying. But at the very end, what little do people know, Doctor Strange, Molecule Man, and Doctor Doom have gone up to confront the Beyonders. Doctor Doom has stolen their powers. And basically, it's almost what it reminded me of, if Doctor Doom had been like a 10-year-old Marvel fan, and you were asked, like, you've got 5 minutes to make up a world of your favorite ingredients from Marvel, what would that world look like? And he's like, all right, well, I guess the Thing will be a giant wall, and the Human Torch will be the sun, and my army will all be Thor's. And it's like, Dr. Doom, you're supposed to be a sophisticated, intelligent guy. You think like a 10-year-old, but his version of Battle World is designed to be like the biggest wet dream for a little boy you could ever possibly imagine. And of course, he steals Reed Richards' life. He steals his wife. He steals his children. And that, I feel like, is like the secret sauce to Hickman's genius, is understanding that what Doom really wants is to be Reed Richards. And that's some of the most interesting stuff in there. And slowly but surely, like, Valeria is figuring out like what's the real deal and why is Dr. Doom acting in such a strange way. And it all slowly but surely falls to pieces as people start getting their memories back and so on and so forth. It's quite a ride. I'm not expecting the movie to adapt even 10% of what Hickman cooked up, but as like an idea factory. I remember when this comic was being published, I kept thinking like, all right now, because around this time we were leading up to Civil War and we were leading up to Infinity War. I was like, it's so cool how Marvel can remain an idea lab with all these cool ideas and all these cool concepts. And then the movies can take Winter Soldier, take Guardians, take what they want and try to adapt them to the best of their ability. But then the movies just took over and the comics collapsed. So the idea factory is gone. So now all we have is like the past as like the idea factory to draw from.
I mean, that's great. You know, I mean, we didn't discuss X-Men. Well, no, maybe you brought up X-Men 97. I really liked X-Men 97 because I thought these were comics that I read back when they were being written. I did not watch the X-Men series when it aired in the 90s. I just watched this on a lark. I really didn't like the old series, but everyone said this one was really good. And I saw what they did was they used the storylines that essentially everybody was clearing their throat and coughing and making half stutter steps towards some series of comic book, profundity from month to month, kind of getting it right, kind of getting it wrong. But it's like you have the advantage 30 years later of grabbing all these stories from the early 90s and the mid 90s and the late 90s, shaving them down.
Or late 80s, like Inferno and things like that.
Yeah. What you're doing is you're sort of just taking what do you think what meant the most? What was the thing that people remember the most? And you don't have to deal with the 23 page grind of getting through a monthly comic book and how that just wears you down, and the soap opera ephemera. It's like what actually mattered about the Extinction Agenda, the Executioner's Song, all these things. And I found that it's like when you just strip it for parts and you just use the best ingredients as, it's like you essentially skip over all the shit that you kind of forget, or and all of a sudden it looks like a completely different stuff. All this, it was the Scott Lobdell and Fabian Nicier's storytelling, and they're not bad writers, but it's like it was so much goo. And the show also was
wisely stripping a better era for parts. I think one of the big failures of Marvel over the last 5 years for the movies is that they were stripping the current Marvel for parts. Like, no, you still got so much good stuff from the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. Strip that shit for parts. And they're like, no, we want to strip the stuff apart from after Disney bought Marvel because we own all this stuff. I'm like, that's not the good stuff. No one loves Marvel Comics from after the Disney acquisition. They love Marvel Comics from the good old days. Strip those eras for parts.
But you need the foresight to know what works and what doesn't, and how to literally.
You need to be a fan.
Yeah, you got to polish them fucking stones to a high shine. And I think 97 got it right. I think that I don't think that, Hickman needed to do that with the story. Although it's interesting because, the reason why we got the Secret Wars in the first place is because Marvel corporate said, we're going to cancel the Ultimate line. However, we want to keep the best parts, essentially stripped for parts.
We want to take 2 or 3 characters from Ultimate, steal them, and let that universe die. Because it was a weird thing where in the early 2000s between Bendis and Miller, they were almost a victim of their own success. Like, well, fuck, well, people love the Ultimates and they love like the Ultimate world, but like it's confusing to have 2 rival universes going side by side. And the Ultimate universe was starting to run out of steam and it was getting a little boring. I was not sorry to see the Ultimate line go, but circa 2001, I mean, I was up the butt of Mark Miller and Brian Hitch's Ultimates.
Yeah, and Bendis and Mark Bagley's Ultimate Spider-Man. And it's like, again, what they had at the beginning was a lack of continuity and a fresh take. And it's like, that means after 75 issues of either of those series, you're back to square one. The whole reason you needed Ultimates was to clear the slate. It's like, Ultimates was just a gigantic parallel continuity that has just been so bogged down by so many different writers coming in. And
I've never minded continuity. I've never understood this conventional wisdom like, oh, continuity is an obstacle to new readers. When I started reading Marvel Comics in the early 80s, like religiously, there's 20 years of continuity. And I loved the continuity. It was like I got excited about exploring the history. I've always rejected this idea that continuity is an obstacle to new people getting on board. I think you should take the attitude of Grant Morrison, where you embrace all the continuity, and same way Hickman embraces all the continuity in his book.
Now you've been proselytizing that lately in Geekin videos, saying that you don't get to ignore shit. It's like your task and your privilege is to be able to process through all of it and use the best parts of it. Yeah. It should influence your writing and add to your psychology.
And the easiest solution always is, if you don't like all the continuity, well then just tell us what happens next. Like the easiest answer in the world. If you're confused about what to do with your Alien movies, well, if you're trying to make your Alien movies take place between Alien movies, well then continuity is going to be an obstacle. But if you just tell a story that takes place after everything, well then you're good to go.
Fucking dare make a step. If with Star Trek, just tell us what's going to happen next. With Star Wars, tell us what's going to happen next.
Well, they are, but it's going to be Starfleet Academy, which does take place like after everything. And spoiler alert, it's going to suck balls. Sight unseen, I can just promise it's going to suck ass, and it does take place after all the Star Trek continuity.
Well, sorry, you want to play that? You want to play that clip of Dr. Doom reintroducing himself to all the gathered Avengers?
Absolutely. It's a great scene. One sec. Here we go.
I understand this must be confusing for all of you. But take heart. For while I am mighty, I am also merciful. I will give you a moment to readjust your old ways of thinking. Then you will bend your knee and bow your head at my feet. Believe in me, for this world is mine.
Yeah, that's their first big confrontation where in his new world, where everything's named after him, it's like, it's like every building, every city's got like Doom in the front. But some heroes and some villains have survived in these ships that remember how things used to be. Nobody else remembers anything unless it's something that Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom kind of made up for them to remember. But as he's confronting the heroes and villains from the old world prior to him reinventing the entire universe, they're about to throw down, and Doctor Strange ends up scattering everybody so that Doctor Doom won't kill everybody. And Doom's like, well, then go fuck yourself. And he ends up killing Doctor Strange then and there. But it is interesting having like Doctor Strange be like Merlin to King Arthur initially as his most loyal kind of advisor. Yeah. And it's a cool little relationship they have in the early part of the series.
Yeah, he's called Sheriff Agamotto, but he clearly has all the powers, but there is very much like a Nicol Williamson quantity to him. And also what I didn't pick this up the first few times I read it, but the thing that Reed Richards and the Illuminati build to essentially call it a lifeboat to survive the purge of the universe is the exact duplicate of the thing that Mike Zeck designed for, or maybe it was John Romita, whoever it was, designed a transportation device in the first.
That fucker. Which I first saw in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man, where prior to the original 84 Secret Wars, in the pages of FF, Avengers, X-Men, Spider-Man, and Hulk, they all felt this irresistible like compulsion to go to Central Park, where they saw this giant thing and like they couldn't help it. They had to walk in and they got teleported away. And yeah, but as you pointed out, Hickman clearly loved that design. It's like, fuck it, I'm bringing those fuckers back 30 years later, and it works.
It's in a conversation. This series is in a dialogue with 84. It doesn't pretend that the 84 doesn't happen, because Doom keeps mentioning the fact that the Beyonders, they encountered a Beyonder in the first Secret Wars. It does mention those things obliquely. And that's what I love about it, is that it's plundering the best parts of continuity. It's replaying the themes. And yet it's sort of like it's a sequel, it's a spiritual sequel, and it builds on all the best ideas. Again, it's like the difference is that you said, Shooter was writing for 8-year-old kids. That was the mandate back in 84. And they were all writing for 8-year-old kids. Larry Hama doing his fucking Vietnam Survivor's Guilt G.I. Joe comic. He was writing for 8-year-olds. However, he was giving 8-year-olds like the stories with the best vocabulary and these real human themes at the time. His G.I. Joe was incredible. And the difference is that like what Hickman is doing in 2015, he's writing for 48-year-old men.
Totally.
I appreciate it, but it's like, that's not how you build a comic book industry. That's how you hold on to
at
existing
that time
readers.
Those are the only people that were still buying comics. Like by 2015, there were no more spinner racks. Like when I would go to the 7-Eleven as a little kid, I was bored as fucking 7-Eleven, but I could walk over to the spinner rack and be entranced. Yeah. By 2015, kids are playing PlayStation and Xbox and that sort of thing. They don't want to read goddamn comics. So I feel like what is your audience? Like I would still spend $100 a week on comics if there were $100 worth of comics for me to buy on a given week, but they don't make those. So instead I read books, and I'm perfectly happy to read books and watch movies. I'm very well served and very well satisfied and that sort of thing. But I was spending probably close to like $5,000 a month on comics, right up to the point when I stopped buying entirely. So there is a business there. It's just a different business from the one from the early 80s.
And I was so surprised, and talk about what do younger people enjoy for sequential entertainment? Like the idea, not just watching TikToks where you're spraining your thumb or your finger, scrolling for a month and a half, but the idea is like, well, younger people like sequential storytelling, episodic storytelling. And it's like, well, they're not getting it from comics. But it's like then to find out how like gigantic a phenomenon, like what is it, One Punch? No, One Piece. One Piece.
Yeah, manga and anime for a 13-year-old have replaced what Marvel Comics was for us in the 1980s.
I mean, granted, that's
old fine. News. Like, manga and anime fucking rules. I love that shit too.
I remember I used to go downstairs. I worked on 100 Broadway across the street from Trinity Church down in the financial district, and I would go down to the Borders on street level during lunch break, and I would see kids sitting with their back, and they would just sit there and mooch the comics. They would read them in the aisles, the manga, and it's like I didn't even realize it's like, oh, these kids have just gone. They just skipped past all of our stuff. This was not for them anymore. Superhero stuff wasn't for them. They were like, or whatever the equivalent of Crunchyroll today is back then. They were reading these Korean, Japanese digests of translations,
many of which went on to be adapted as animated series, like things like Attack on Titan. Like those don't come out of nowhere. It's because they have hundreds of issues to adapt.
Yeah, and I was like, I tried to sample the animated Attack on Titan to see if there was something for me. And much like the idea of like going back and reading comic books for 8-year-olds that were written in 1982, or comic books that are written for 47-year-old men in 2015, I found that somewhere Attack on Titan, I was lost. I didn't quite know which of the me's it was for. I could not find a sort of authorial voice that spoke to me that said, "Oh, I really want to stick with this and get entranced in the episodic nature of it." There was no hook, and so I mean, it's like so long as they're going to be writing comic books for 47-year-old men, I hope they're as good as this one, because it's like I think Hickman outdid himself. And to your point about that's the last thing you may read. I mean, that may be true. It's kind of also a miracle that I think something that has the evergreen power that this thing does, man, there's not a lot of like classic stories that I pick up that are airless and hermetic. I mean, you can read Dark Phoenix, you can read the Trial of Galactus, you can read Daredevil Born Again, and they hang out, in a piece of null time. And it's like, it's been a long time since they made something that really just exists.
Yeah, and I'm sure the Daredevil Born Again TV show, it's basically going to be like, how many times have we seen all those great Frank Miller stories kind of pillaged and stolen from? Like we saw it in the early 2000s, and then we saw it with the Netflix show, and now we're going to see it with the Marvel show. And it's like, I guess we're just doomed to see shows and movies continuing to try and adapt these things. And like, we've never seen them get Dark Phoenix right. I'm sure there'll be one or two more attempts. Like we saw Dark Phoenix. They did it in the early 90s animated show. They did it in X-Men 3. They did it in the Dark Phoenix movie. And it's like, nobody's ever going to get it right. I think the early 90s cartoon did it best, but obviously it's just, you got to read the Chris Claremont story. If you want like X-Men 101 through X-Men 137, that is the Phoenix saga, and it'll never be better than that. But I'm sure people will continue to try to adapt it for many more years to come.
It's so, that's a perfect example of what made that era in comics so great, and that it's comics about comics, but in such a way that it invites you in to read those comics, where it's syncretic. Where in order to get to Dark Phoenix, A, the X-Men have to be in space already. B, like there has to be a Shi'ar Empire. There's so many different prerequisites to finally, when you're running, you're up to steam, you're up to a full sprint. Then you can get something like Dark Phoenix going, which takes all these pieces that Claremont had in front. That's, he's going back to Stan and Jack, space travel, alien races. The idea that there was,
and it has to unfold over years. If you're going to do Dark Phoenix right from movies, the first movie needs to be Jean Grey leading up to whatever happens in space. The second movie just needs to be Phoenix with the green costume. The third movie is when you finally get to Dark Phoenix. You can't just dive right in with Sophie Turner and have Dark Phoenix. Like, it doesn't work. You gotta ease into things, like lead a trail of breadcrumbs. But yeah, nobody has the patience or the taste or the knowledge to do it right.
This is why I also call bullshit on black costume too. And that's what's coincidental for this, is that the black costume that you knew from Venom and all that shit is born here. Like, and it's even such a weird confabulation of where it gets spat out of a machine. Everybody else is getting normal clothes, but then Spider-Man for some reason gets this black alien dumped on him, and that's never really explained, but it's that parasitic
he's just a little black globule floating, and he's like, all right, what's this? And then later on he's like, wait, y'all's costumes don't move? And they're like, no, they're just clothes. He's like, all right.
It's so random, but it worked perfectly. And the thing is, so Venom, Tom Hardy's Venom, I don't know how you explain it. It's a globule that fell from outer space. The Sam Raimi Venom in Spider-Man 3 is a globule that falls out of space. It's like, it's so weird, but it's like, it almost makes perfect sense when you have the entire continuity of Marvel Comics in front of the black costume, to have a battle world, to have a black alien costume, to have all of that shit that adds up to it. So all you're doing is just this little boink. And then it's easy to buy into a black costume. Like, all the track has been laid by the history of comic books.
Totally. All right. Well, let's talk about some of the highlights from Hickman's 9-issue arc, because there are some moments that I really like, or some details that I really like. I mean, I love the idea of all the Thors worshiping Doom as a god. Like, Thor is supposed to be a god, but in the context of Secret Wars, he's got like 100 Thors that all look up to Doom as the god. And you've got Beta Ray Bill, and you got all the different variations of Thor, all part of this force. I thought that was handled incredibly well. And I love how you got all these districts where people like Apocalypse or Mr. Sinister run their kingdoms like totalitarian dictators. They have total authority as long as they are always subservient to Doom, and they bend the knee to Doom as needed. And I just love how every kingdom is run by an iconic villain, and they're always competing with each other. It's all palace intrigue and that sort of thing. And I love how Doom basically has the entire Fantastic Four family, either as his family or his servants, apart from Reed Richards. And he keeps looking for Reed Richards, and he doesn't understand why he can't find Reed Richards and all the different, like, kind of like multiverse. He doesn't realize that Reed Richards is still out there just waiting to be rediscovered. But I love the setting. I love the world. And it's imagine if the MCU with the movies, if they decided Doomsday is going to lead up to the point where he becomes omniscient. And at the beginning of the Secret Wars movie, you have a brand new status quo from the point of view of Robert Downey Jr., like organizing the universe as he sees fit. And then you have to have the heroes kind of like remember who they are and take everything back. There's a ton of potential there. And I just love the idea of reinterpreting Thing as a giant wall and Human Torch as the sun. Or like, hang on, there's one really cool bit. Oh, when Doctor Strange accuses Doom of stealing Reed's life and still being afraid of him in spite of being omniscient, and that's when Doom finally kills him. It was so goddamn cool. Or like the new version of the Fantastic Four origin story, where you got Nathaniel Richards in there, and like, or when Thing and Franklin Richards have to fight. Like, Franklin Richards has basically become like the new Galactus. And Thing basically decides, I'm not going to be a wall anymore to all these like hordes of demons and undead that are lurking outside the gates. But when Thing finally realizes like who Galactus is, he just lets
I can't fight you, kid.
Let's Franklin kill him then and there. It's like that, but you don't get that emotional beat or that drama, that gravitas, if you don't have decades upon decades of Thing and Franklin bonding and getting piggyback rides and all that stuff. Between the Fantastic Four movie and the Doomsday movie, I don't know if there's enough runway there to build up enough kind of interpersonal connection between all these characters. But like I said with my analogy for Phoenix, all you need needs to be 3 movies. There is actually a chance that between the Fantastic Four movie and the Doomsday movie and Secret Wars that we could get something resembling all those arcs building to a head. But so much has to go right in order for Secret Wars to be satisfying in that fashion.
You know, it's like watching Chris Evans fight Thanos with the hammer in Endgame. You know, like it's personal for him, even though it's personal for Captain America at that moment. And it's like, I don't think that maybe Thanos remembers him when he was holding onto his shield at the end of Avengers Infinity War. And it's like, you can believe that the characters themselves have synthesized how important this is to them. And, you know, it's like, if you're not going to get the entire, like, you can't synthesize all the history of the Jack and Stan's version of Reed and Victor. Like, that's going to be impossible. But you can make Victor Von Doom into a world-class threat where everyone sort of invents their own version of how terrifying he is. Yeah. And that, I think, the gravitas is going to be added by these actors. But also Downey's going to be able to, again, unless he fucking shits the bed in a grand scheme, a grand style, he's going to be able to, you know, totally create a character in the middle of all this.
Let us hope so. One thing that will not make it in, because they've already kind of like what sometimes gets overlooked when you make a bad show or a bad movie, exploiting ideas or characters, how you kind of ruin using them to the best of their ability later on. Like my favorite moment of all the 9 issues is at the end of issue 8, when Submariner and Black Panther have set aside their differences after trying to kill each other a million times, and Black Panther shows up wearing an Infinity Gauntlet, and he's prepared to throw down with Dr. Doom. And it's just the perfect cliffhanger leading into the final issue. But around that same time, you prepared one last clip with Moose showing just how strong Doom is when he faces Thanos, and Thanos is convinced that he's going to knock Doom down a peg or two, and it doesn't quite work out the way Thanos thought it would.
And do you have an Infinity Gauntlet now? I do not. Yet I remain Thanos, the great tyrant. And for you, that will be enough. That appears untrue.
I mean, fantastic. I mean, here Thanos is the baddie of Marvel, and I love how Doom just reaches in and pulls out his spine and skull and kills him then and there. Like, they really do establish just how strong he really is. And I like how in Hickman's Secret Wars, he's been omniscient and omnipotent for a very long time, whereas in Shooters, when he's so overwhelmed by the power, he keeps worrying, like if he even falls asleep, he might have a dream and eradicate universes. He's barely able to kind of hang on to like control over his powers. But in Hickman, at least, he's got full control over his omniscience and omnipotence, but he's still got like little blind areas that he can't see, which is why he needs like servants and armies and that sort of thing. But I just loved how fucking hardcore and thuggish they made him. And when he's fighting Black Panther with the Infinity Gauntlet, at a certain point, he realizes, oh, this is a distraction. Like the real threat is Reed Richards going after Molecule Man. It's almost like Frodo taking the ring to Mount Doom. Like Sauron can't possibly imagine that he would ever have like a threat kind of sneaking in to Mordor with quiet little footsteps. It's going to be a huge king revealing himself, and that's the real threat. So yeah, Doom's throwing down with Black Panther, and little does he know, Reed Richards is plotting and scheming to take him down.
Yeah, you know, the thing that unravels Doom in the 1984 Secret Wars is that he inadvertently reconstitutes all the Avengers, and you know, essentially as he's fretting, what happens if this happens and what happens if this happens, they bust through the door like the Kool-Aid man and beat the shit.
Thor's hammer comes to the wall and he goes, the hammer of Thor. Secretly, Dr. Doom doesn't want to win. He doesn't want to be omniscient. He doesn't want to be omnipotent, and so he keeps inventing things to kill him and stop him. And that's yet another fascinating part about Dr. Doom, is that he thinks he wants to be the Almighty, but part of him also recognizes you wouldn't be that good at it. Like it should be Reed who should be the almighty and be able to order things and so on and so forth. And I hope that these movies are able to get into all these fascinating little contradictions where he can be such a villain, such a tyrant, so insecure, so like lovable and charismatic. There's so many different aspects to his personality. He contains so many multitudes. And I just feel like there are a lot of writers in Hollywood who just don't like complexity. They don't like nuance. They don't like contradictions. They're almost afraid of those things. Please, baby Jesus, give us a Dr. Doom that we can all finally love after all these years. But you have a few more Dr. Doom clips from earlier iterations we have not shared yet. And before we run out of time, I do want to share your clips from 1981, which you sent me ahead of time. So here is one version of Dr. Doom's origin, which we have not yet discussed.
What have I done to myself? My face, it is hideous.
I mean, okay. I
like
don't know
the
if that's
accent.
the way. That's not the way he sounds in my head, but that's from Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Yeah, that's the classic.
Which that was my crack when I was on TV in the early 80s.
I mean, come on. If that's the first place I saw these characters, I knew they existed, but that's the first time I saw the X-Men, for instance. There's that one episode that had Nightcrawler, and when they mentioned Nightcrawler left the smell of brimstone because I think he was being impersonated by.
It's actually a really good version on screen of the X-Men for the first time, like comic books accurate costumes and that sort of thing. Yeah. The only thing that's weird is like Kitty Pryde is kind of a funky looking uniform, but they more or less nailed the X-Men in cartoon form at that time.
Yeah, a little better than like the Pride of the X-Men animation that Sunbow would do. The guys who did Transformers and G.I. Joe. That was a better looking version, but I don't think they were nearly.
Wolverine was Australian. Little did they know that it would be. They were being, what do you call it when you're able to look at it? They could predict that a famous Aussie would actually bring them to life in the years to come.
Using a shitty accent too. Yeah, so that actually Dr. Doom's in the credits for Spider-Man Amazing Friends. He's like the last villain.
You got the theme song. It's like, all that stuff. And they had this great shot of Dr. Doom kind of like, going back into the screen, like blasting lasers. But he is that is one of the iconic early 80s cartoon openings, and I've watched it 100 million times as an adult with a big giant smile on my face. But yeah, there's Dr. Doom. There's like a big giant like fire monster walking through the city. There's all sorts of things that you see, but fantastic stuff. And that song is just delicious.
It's a killer. It's a killer. Yeah, better than I think the 1990s Spider-Man theme, which I never really liked that hard rocking out guitar song.
They were trying to recapture the X-Men theme from the early ends, like all that stuff. But a good theme song goes a long way. But we have one more clip from the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends with Doom. Do you want to tee it up?
Oh, I forget which one this is. I made so goddamn many of them. All
right, I'll surprise you then.
Now that I am the appointed leader of all 7 of Earth's continents.
That's what you think, Tinhead. You forgot about your friendly neighborhood web spinner.
You apparently do not understand, Spider-Man.
I love how back in the day, everybody was something head, like Iron Man was shell head, Spider-Man was web head, Captain America was wing head. That's all Stanley. And like, of course they call Dr. Doom tin head, but that must have been like his way. He would just talk to people in the 60s and 70s. Everybody was something head. Or how Reed Richards, they call him Stretcho. Like, just the Stanley nicknames were always just so fucking fun.
Yeah, it was the Thing would call Reed High Pockets or Stretcho or something like that.
Stretch and Stretcho, yeah.
Well, that's the thing. You know what? You would have never seen Julie Schwartz's version of his 1950s and 60s sort of superhero science fiction themes characters being so casual and cavalier with each other. And I mean, the voice of the DC Thing was like very high dudgeon, high drama, ethereal science fiction, for the mid-century. And it's like when Stan and Jack were kind of like making that voice of the Silver Age, it's like they brought the heroes down. It wasn't just the fact that like Peter Parker had a job and he had to juggle, his Aunt May and classwork and all that stuff. It was the fact that they were very irreverent and informal with each other.
They're all New Yorkers.
They're all New Yorkers, and so you would essentially mouth off to a god. If the blonde thunder god from fucking Norway is going to land in front of you, there's going to be some New Yorker that says, "Hey, buddy, get out of the way! I'm driving a cab here." And it's like That was the actual tenor of the comic books. It took place in New York, and it was like Stan's very irreverent New York. It was, like I said, it was nobody stood on airs, and nobody was like allowed to inflate themselves too much. And that's why the voice of Doctor Doom meant so much. It was such a contrast to how sort of informal and chummy and clubby all the rest of the Marvel
He was
universe
highfalutin.
Right. And it's like you're supposed to look at him as a stuffed shirt, like any number of people out of a Marx Brothers movie, like the people they're there to take down and put their face in soup. Yeah. However, it's like Doom was too strong for all that. Doom, like he walked the walk and he talked the talk. He had this incredible voice, and he was someone to be feared. And that's like one of the few things where like the bad guy wasn't risible, like where Dr. Octopus would get like a web in his mouth. The Spider-Man would tell him to shut up, and he would like web over his mouth. It's like, that's a mockery, but you would never do that to Dr. Doom, so far as I know.
Yeah, he must have webbed up his face or mouth at some point over the decades.
Yeah.
But who the hell knows? But we are starting to get to the point where I might have to wrap things up because I have actually a movie I have to get to. So final points, final comments, final things you would like to see in Doomsday and Secret Wars, and just any kind of conclude or closing comments or remarks by the great Bill Scurry.
Well, I think that these two series are a great bit of evidence for showing you how sort of elastic, at the same time concrete, the concept of Doctor Doom is. Where, like the best writers from every decade or every era or every epoch of comic books is able to use him and kind of like even just keeping according to what's been laid down. You're not contradicting a fucking thing. You're just essentially using this character like as it was built in the beginning. Very simple. And, to cast it to the movies, I know their version of Thanos they came up with was not the version of the man Titanium that we know. But, however, they did manage to create a sui generis person in the middle of it that served the purpose. Their version of Thanos was, again, based on the parts of Jim Starlin, based on the parts of Infinity Gauntlet, but he did not act anything at all like Jim Starlin's Thanos. And it's like
they didn't do the work of Captain Marvel and Adam Warlock and all those storylines that inform the Thanos of Jim Starlin, and so they basically just wanted to skip ahead to the Thanos from much later.
It worked. I mean, it's like that Thanos could have been ransacked from the Eternals. Like he could have been any number of other cosmic powered villains. There was, other than the fact that he had the Infinity Gauntlet that we associate it with, that's what made him need to be Thanos, or at least it was optimized.
He could have been as bad as the villain in the Marvels, a character whose name nobody remembers.
I don't even remember. Yeah, I never even saw the Marvels. So
Tom Hiddleston's wife, but anyway, no one knows her name. But she's basically the female version of Ronan the Accuser. But anyway, but it could have been like that because Marvel historically has gotten their villains wrong. Apart from Loki and Thanos and Hela, all the other villains have more or less sucked.
Like Doctor Strange says when he says, I've looked into a billion futures and there's one, that actually we win. And it's like there is a little bit of doorway where they managed to do the same thing they did with Thanos. They changed the origin around. They maintain the pieces that are well enough. And you just fucking serve the feature film product. Give us something that works. And we will forgive all the stuff that Doom is not. If it's enough of the great stuff that Doom should be, that makes the movie work. I think we'll be very happy in that case.
And if we get that 1 in a million version of Doom, let's say hypothetically, between now and 2026, if Marvel pukes out a couple of subpar shows and movies, all will be forgiven. Like Deadpool and Wolverine just ripped right past $1 billion, no problem, in spite of the fact that, as they say in the movie, coming in at a bit of a low point. It's in the movie, they're making fun of the multiverse. They're making fun of the fact that the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's on its last legs at this point. But people will forgive everything if you give us a great movie-going experience. And so I once again, I'm just going to try not to be too judgmental and too harsh over the next 2 years as we lead up to it, just knowing like what is the end game. But if we get to the end game and Doomsday and Secret Wars are terrible, it's over.
Fine. Doesn't have to be that way. We had Paris along the way. That's fine.
Yeah, we had our fun. Well, I can't thank you enough for putting together these amazing clips with Moose. Shout out to you. Shout out to Moose Matson. I'll include links to your YouTube channel and Moose's YouTube channel down in the description below. And who knows what other strange collaborations we might cook up between the three of us. I want to get the two of y'all do a hitting the brakes of Moose and Bill. I want to do like a hitting the brakes of Moose and Bill episode on my channel because I missed those collaborations between y'all.
Yeah, that's true. We chat a lot in back channels, but we haven't made a lot of stuff together. But yeah, Moose is a gentleman. He's a fine example of a Michigander for sure.
Well, I see him every Monday because we're playing tabletop RPGs, means every description for every room I turn over to him. So it's like my players get to hear real voiceover describing the rooms, and they hear my voice less. Because if you're the dungeon master, you always end up talking too much. People get sick of the sound of your voice. So Moose like saves me from myself. And we've been playing now for years, and he does an amazing job. And also while we're playing, he's always working on these little like little clips and videos behind the scenes that are like meta commentary on what's happening in the module. So when the module ends, we have like 30 minutes of Moose Madsen shorts to watch, and it's fucking delightful. So anyway,
get your ass out to the screening. All right.
Absolutely. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this show. Please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, hitting that notification bell, and let us know what you think down in the comments below about what the future might hold for Marvel. Obviously, Disney is going to try to exploit these characters until the end of time. But the question is, can they ever recapture that first 10-year stretch that we all know and love so dearly? I am open to the possibility of a major comeback. And over the last few years, I never thought I would say that. And so my cold, dead heart still has hope for the future. But once again, it's all execution dependent. If you give us good movies, people will forgive everything, and we might see the MCU reign supreme once again. But I guess on that note, I'll just use my old catchphrase to wrap up everything. But as always, more important, my brain has stopped working toward the end of 2 hours of talking. I can't even use like my catchphrases. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.
Ain't like it used to be, but it'll do.
You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow.